Sometimes the people would come in actually almost clothing blown off them, just from the nature of the blast. Except the boots. The boots were so tightly on that you can't blow them off and let you bleed a leg off. Getting cleaned, we can't even find all the wounds, he's so dirty. So walked him into the showers, and there he is in the showers, praying, shivering from fear and shock, because he's been injured and he doesn't know how badly. And typical young guys, they thought, oh, we'll race these vehicles. And unfortunately, there was an ambush set up on this particular day. So the vehicle that won got shot. Both drivers, both people got killed in that vehicle, and he was one of them. We've had Australian troops ambush each other accidentally. And we brought both sides in, both groups in, because they did a lot of damage to each other. Fortunately, no one died.
Well, thanks for having us here today, Ziggy. It'd be great if, for starters, we could talk a little bit about your childhood, your early years. So if you could sort of start off with where you were born and a bit about your family background.
Okay. I know I was born in Fulda, Germany, in 1947, and my parents at that stage were in Germany after applying for exit to Australia because they were classed as displaced persons. They're of Lithuanian descent, so Lithuania was taken over behind the Iron Curtain at that stage, and that's the last place they wanted to go back to was the concept of communism.
So when exactly did you sign up?
Would have been at the end of November or December, because the school, secondary school exams had just finished. That's what, in my last exam, I was still in school uniform when I turned up to the recruiting agency.
1966.
No, sorry. It was 65 that I actually signed on a dotted line. It was in the February that I actually went to recruit camp. So it was just over the Christmas period. Nothing happens then. So it was at that time I had plenty of time to think about it. And well, I'd already signed, so I wasn't going to think about it. I was looking forward to it.
Mm. So if national service hadn't been introduced, do you think you would have enlisted?
If the situation had been going the way it was, if Australia was attempting to recruit people for this, I probably would have. Yes.
Okay. So you've been pretty young then. You were 15, 16?
At the time, no. I had to repeat a year in year 11. So actually, when I joined, I would have been 19.
So you just finished? Oh, you just finished year 11. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And you sort of told us how your mother wasn't terribly pleased, but your father said, "Yeah, go for it."
Go for it.
Any words of advice or encouragement from them once you had signed up? Was there advice?
Yes, from my mother, because it was obvious that I would have gone into Vietnam. It was obvious, and her big thing was, please don't come back with a Vietnamese bride. That was her only advice. Really, just to sort of survive, come back in one piece. Yeah, but her only thing was don't come back with a Vietnamese bride.
And what about your dad? What did he have to say?
No, not much. Yeah, I think he was proud. You could tell. That was from him. But again, I wasn't that close to my father.
Now, you were a bit concerned wearing glasses, weren't you, about signing
Yes.
up and the fact that they might possibly reject you? Is that
correct?
Fair to say? So how long had you been needing the glasses?
From about 12 or 14. Actually, a school teacher sort of said, you're squinting at the board all the time. I recommend to your parents take you to, and eventually one of the teachers spoke to my mother and said you should take him to an optometrist, etc. Yeah, immediately get glasses, and then it was a revelation. Oh, look how clear the world is. Yes, and wore glasses from then on. I've got astigmatism. That's the thing that causes the problems. The short-sightedness isn't that big. And what they did in the military was that my dominant eye, which does the focusing through a rifle, was the better eye. So not a problem, fella. We'll take it. Which means basically I could fight without glasses.
So when you signed on the dotted line, what were you thinking? Was it you wanted to be an infantryman, or did?
At that
Didn't
moment,
bother you?
I didn't know. I didn't know what was in front of me. I didn't know the various cores that existed. So, you know, the element in the military always is, most people look at it, it's the, pardon me, the fighting soldier, you know, running around pack and rifle and jumping in the dirt and out of holes and things. That's the impression. I didn't realise there were so many other positions there. Unfortunately, at recruitment, one of the guys said, "Oh, gee, with your education, you should be able to go into survey work," you know. And again, I didn't realise that survey took up a lot of mathematics. So anyway, eventually that was discouraged. No, don't pick survey, you know, we need people in other areas. So at recruitment stage, once you were almost completing recruitment as a regular soldier, you were actually given 3 choices of what to join. Where would you like to go? Then we'll tell you where you do go. I think national servicemen didn't have much of a choice at all.
But the permanent guys did.
We were given 3 choices, yes. At the recruit stage. By that stage, you had an idea what the different forces were, what the different cores and elements were within the military. And well, you had to have an understanding just for you to be able to choose whether you would, first of all, whether they think you'd be suitable, and that the other element is that whether you'd function in those units.
Okay, so after having signed on the dotted line, what's the next thing you hear from the army?
Oh, a letter of what to bring and when to be at the railway station. That was basically it. Oh yeah, because you had to turn up at the railway, and I think there was one room near the railway station where they all brought you in, so you knew, oh, all these guys joining up, you know, terrific. And it was very much impressed on you that you're joining the regular army, not the conscripts, because a lot of the guys joined for 3 years. I was the one who was impressed with 6 years for some reason. So I took 6 years, signed on a dotted line, and that's when you swore on the Bible, allegiance to the Queen. And then you know you were committed, and you had to get on the train, because you were given an out just up until that final moment, and that was sort of impressed on you. If you take this oath, you go on the train, right? And you're not going to see your parents for about 8 weeks. I think they wouldn't let you out of camp for about 8 weeks because it was so tough. I mean, they were too scared to lose people. If you went home, you'd never come back again, probably. They don't realise that some people actually enjoyed what they did there.
So sorry, you swore that oath at the train station?
I believe so, as far as I remember, yeah.
Which station was that?
Oh, Spencer Street Station, because it was a train going up to Sydney, Albury. And from Albury we were bussed, I think we were bussed, to Wagga Wagga.
All right, so on the completion of that training, you had to choose what you wanted to do?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, and being a regular, we were given 3 choices, and I put down, because I really started enjoying the training and enjoying the bush, etc., and I said, well, look, I'd like infantry, and medics. And the guy said, you're not allowed to put the same thing twice. And I heard from the others, oh, put it down 3 times, and they've got to give it to you. The guy said, no, that's, we'll punish you for this. So, okay. So what do you want to join the infantry? I said, I love running around the bush. I like this. So he said, oh, all right. And he says, why do you want to be, why did you choose medics? Because in the military, medics is like, you want to be a nurse? You want to be, oh, gee, that's not very manly, is it? Sort of thing. That's the sort of attitude. That's a bit sissy. That was the attitude. Why do you want to be a medic? I'm scared of blood. Oh, no. Really? Well, I said, well, I've learnt that if you're scared of something and you train through it, you eventually adopt it. You're okay with it. He said, oh, well. And I looked at it and I thought, bugger it. I've realised what's going to happen. They're going to give me medics. And sure enough, at the it's not a graduation or anything, but you don't know where you're going. And you know you've completed it successfully, the course, and then the lieutenant and the sergeant walk in and they've got bags of buttons and emblems for your uniform. Because at the moment you've only got the rising sun on your buttons and things like that. So they walk in and they say, okay, we're going to allocate, and we stand in a corridor and they say, here's your bag, here's yours, and nothing's marked on except your name. And they said, okay, everyone, open the bags, paper bags. You open them up, and as soon as you see the button, you know where you went, what corps you go into, and medics. Where'd you go? Where did you go? Where did you go? You ask everybody. And most of us got what we wanted. I got medics. I didn't mind.
You weren't disappointed?
No, it got me back to Victoria where medical corps training was at Hillsville. And I lived in Melbourne.
So then where did you go for your medical training?
It was at that time, the School of Army Health was at Hillsville at a lovely manor and grounds and a golf course overlooking the sanctuary, the Hillsville Sanctuary, where all the animals are and things. And we remember some of our training. You'd be lying along the fence, hiding from the enemy, and the emus would come up along the fence on the other side of the fence and look at you. And then the enemy would know exactly where you were. So we had little things like that.
Well, let's talk about the training that you did get, the medical training. So nobody had had any experience with medical training before, presumably?
None.
They're starting from the very beginning?
Yeah. So everything from nursing training, which was the basic medical terminologies, anatomy, drugs. You had to know that, so I could identify and not give the wrong thing. All the way that doctors wrote their scripts and things. So you had to be able to read the script, and so you knew what timings and drugs to give and the procedure to take. Complete ward procedure. So we got pretty good at making beds, things like that, and keeping things spotless and polishing floors, things like that. How to give out food, because not everyone can eat the normal food. Some people have to have soft rations because of mouth injuries or alimentary tract injuries, things like that. So the whole gambit of nursing, giving drugs, giving injections, that sort of work. That's what we had to qualify for.
What about wounds? Different kinds of battle wounds?
That was more difficult to train. This is why we thought we should have had similar training to what the other medics, the SAS medics got, which is immediately you've had your training, go to a hospital, sit and go out with the ambulances. That would have equipped us a more confidence to deal with battle casualties, because we had problems with medics in Vietnam from battle casualties in there. Because remember, all this so far is probabilities, it's book learning. It's having seen on the film, etc. You get some guy screaming and you're the man in charge. Everyone's standing around watching. What are you going to do to my mate? The world changes completely. The world changes. Everything. You are God, and all the responsibility of the whole world is on your shoulders. Very frightening. We had people lose it and get traumatic shock out of that.
Once
Sent
they
home.
got up there, yeah.
Mm.
So no practical training at all?
Not that element. Not what we thought was the need for us to have that battle training with the battle wounds, which the obvious thing is go to a hospital in triage or go out with the ambulances. But then again, there were so many that they had put through, I couldn't have seen how they could have administratively organised that anyway. Because remember, now they were pushing us and training us number-wise, because they were going to need all these troops in Vietnam. At that time, not to our knowledge, but that's what they were preparing us for. They had to get the numbers through for that. And you get this element that you're going to be the skilled person. You need to know that to give you confidence. Because in the medical area, you want the medical person to show confidence. And therefore, if you're the injured party, you feel a little bit better, that they sound confident, that they know what that you can give. The worst thing is, you'll be right, mate. That's the worst thing you can say to a person. The person is in severe pain. I'm not going to be right. I'm seriously injured, and they know it. So these sort of things. So we never got that element of it. And immediately after the core training, immediately I was shipped to, most of our guys were shipped to Pacapanel. It's not shipped, it's just a drive to Pacapanel and set up in a very old World War II barracks. They wouldn't let us have the heaters on at night because I was scared of fire. And that's where we started preparing to have to set up a unit, a field ambulance to go to Vietnam. Once we were there, that's where we realised, yes, fellas, we're going to Vietnam. So again, the seriousness of the situation, the seriousness of any further training, the role we had to play became serious. And we then started national service and regular troops. We started forming a really cohesive unit, because we're all going to be in a situation together. So we had to do that.
And before you embarked, what was your state of mind? I mean, do you remember actually being told this is the day you're going, this is what the plans are?
I think it was more excitement. Excitement that we're really going to put our training to the test, that this was for real. The satisfaction knowing that they considered you a person worthy of the position or supposed to go to that area. I think it was satisfaction really, because we trained for it. We thought we could do the job, and the element was that yes, we were going to go, we're not going to miss it. A lot of us were concerned that we didn't get any medical injury here, like a broken leg or something that would preclude us from leaving with the unit to go overseas. That was in the forefront of our mind. 3 days later, after arriving in country, it was a little bit different. We landed in the country late afternoon. The back doors came down in the Hercules as they can. The plane started taxiing backwards to get to where we needed to go. Our weapons were stored in the storage compartment below. We only had loaded magazines in our hands and no weapons. And all of a sudden we see black pyjama-clad people with the slanty hats running around everywhere. We thought we had been invaded. We panicked. We didn't know what to do. That was the first real fright we had, because we weren't forewarned that this is basically the national work dress. So they weren't necessarily the Viet Cong, but it gave us all a big shock.
Okay, just a couple of points about getting to you flew into Saigon, is that correct? Or
No, we flew straight into Vung Tau. Bypass Saigon. That was when we got out, when we finished our tour.
All right. Now you're taking over from it was the second field ambulance, and you're the eighth field ambulance. Can you sort of tell us just basically what the makeup of the field ambulance is? What you've sort of told us what their purpose is, but who you're going to be working alongside, the different roles that were part of the field ambulance?
Because the role, from the way it was written on paper, it was written in Second World War theory, the way it was laid out, I think. But they realised very quickly that we were going to be a static unit and in one place, and therefore we had to shuffle things around to cope with that, because we were going to run a fully fledged surgical unit out of there. And so the actual layout of how people worked, what the officers did, what the Q store people did, again, being a private soldier in those days, I didn't have much access to it, and I didn't have much interest in it at that time. What happened was, when we hit the country, although we were supposed to have 2 weeks to acclimatise, there was no time for that. A lot of second field ambulance had already been partly shipped out, and what we found was a lot of the guys who were left were switched off, basically. So we had to take the mantle on very quickly in relation to it, because we went into accommodation which was canvas tented accommodation. Most of the medical facility was aluminium huts with louver windows, wall to ceiling, through there on a concrete block. But we were in tents on the sand dunes there, so we had to operate out of that. And the humidity as it hit you was so difficult to accept, because you had to go straight into 12-hour shifts, no matter what you did, whether you're doing sandbagging, doing other work, cleaning up, whether you're on the ward. In that moment, to be working in a ward, not working in the hot sand, yes, it was a godsend, so that was beautiful. And then this big box of photographic equipment arrived, was unpacked. I said, okay, check that it's all there now, check the list, and I didn't know what half of it was. I had a huge telephoto lens that we could never use, which are probably taking shots of warships off the sand dunes. That all occurred. I tried to get condition there. About the third day in country, I was quite happy to break my leg and go home. I felt that alienated to the locality, and the humidity got me so bad, and I was getting heat rash and things like that. So I was quite happy. I thought, I've done my bit. I'm quite happy to go home. But gradually you got used to it, because, again, there was work to do. I never found a boring time as such. It was work, 12-hour shifts. For me, it ended up being slightly different, because quite often we came in, I think almost immediately we started getting casualties, because that never stopped. It's just that our unit changeover was occurring. So the surgeons quickly found out that I'm there to take photos. So I was called at a moment's notice. That's why I worked in the ward facility that I didn't have much to do or much responsibility as such, so I could be called off at any moment. But the worst thing is you finish your 12-hour shift, usually a daylight shift, you go to bed, you're exhausted, you lie down and you the chopper coming in. And you go, no, no. And you're lying there, you know it's landing on your field, you're lying there and the speaker comes on, like if you've seen in MASH, the loudspeaker, you know, private so-and-so, report to the operating theatre. No, I'm not hearing it, I'm not hearing it. And the guard comes around, kicks you out of bed, you're on there, grab your camera and you stumble in. Could be there for 2 hours and you go back to bed and an hour later you're back on shift. So sometimes it was quite exhausting work.
Right, so can you sort of just maybe tell us a bit about Vung Tau or the base itself and a bit about the geography and the atmosphere of where you were working before we get into the nitty-gritty of what you were doing, perhaps?
Well, Vung Tau was basically a peninsula jutting out into the South China Sea. I don't know what the big river was on the western side of it. I'm not sure of that. The geography, again, being only a private there, at that time I wasn't responsible for movement of troops and things, and the locality didn't mean much at the time. But
I guess I mean more the layout of where you were working,
okay.
your barracks in relation to where you...
Oh, well, that was the living facility was only about a 2-minute walk from the actual working facility there. It was just on the other sand dune. The hospital was actually set up on one sand dune, a more flatter, more stabilised sand dune with a concrete base. The officers' mess was on another sand dune, the highest sand dune, of course. They lived on Mount Olympus, which officers often do, closest to the gods. We lived on a series of other sand dunes, which eventually were converted into concrete slabs with wooden structures into a type of barracks, tropical barracks, which when the monsoons came, the rain came straight through it because of the big open window situations. So it was within, you actually lived within your work area. So plus it was your responsibility to protect your work area. All the compounds and the various areas were surrounded by barbed wire. There were only certain entrances and exits, basically that, to feed people through areas. And so you were your own little world in there. It was only a little bit later on they got more confidence in us and let us have half days off or full days off in town. There was always a curfew there, and everyone had to be back by about 10 p.m. And you could either walk down the beaches towards the actual headland. There was a rocky outcrop with an old French fort on it with the old French guns still there. And then you walked around that headland and you were actually in the township itself, which for an Asian township, which struck us was a butcher with no freezing facilities, the butchery occurring right in front of your eyes, all of this sort of stuff, flies everywhere. People generally not overtly friendly, but accepting, you might say, because when you went to town, you were mixing it with Americans, Koreans, I think they were the main ones in our area of responsibility. So, you were there and the Vietnamese were trying to sell you things or trying to just live their lives in there. But it was a beach area, it was a marine area around it, because one of the industries of Vung Tau was fishing. And they used to get, a lot of the fishing boats come in, unload their catches and things, and how they processed them or moved them, I don't know, because we had trouble moving in there. It was either you fly or you go by armed convoy. And that's after they repaired some of the bridges which were blown up, leading off that peninsula. Yeah, and so there was a lot of barbed wire. There were limitations of where you could go, could not go. The main thing that struck you was that Vung Tau was a major American air base, not suited for fighter aircraft or bombers, but small aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft, helicopters, yes, but what we learnt later was the spook aircraft, which were ugly-looking twin-engine things, which, as they came in at night from the sea, as they come in, and it's just a humming sound. You could, which is odd thing, the back of your neck would prickle, and you could see this thing like a bat, just glide in over the sea, over your buildings, and just disappear. No engines going. And we thought that was fascinating, coming in there. So it was you might say, coastal marine environment that we were faced with. So a lot of salt, a lot of sand, a lot of glare from the sand, and being Australians, we were not permitted to wear sunglasses on duty because we looked like Americans. So that was forbidden, and I think from that I've had photosensitivity. Means if I get a flash of light, like through windows or out driving, I must always drive in sunlight with sunglasses. If I get a flash of light, within about 15 minutes I've got a migraine. Where I do lose sight for about 15 minutes. I've got to stop, pull over, and that. So I think it stemmed from that. Much later, they learnt that unless you protect the troops' eyes, all modern troops wear these fancy glasses and protective eyewear, that's what you get. But you can't claim on it.
So what was the reasoning behind with you all being forbidden to wear sunglasses?
Yeah, because we look like Americans.
And that
was the only reason given to us.
And further behind, what was that? That was a bad thing, wasn't it?
Well, it didn't suit the British military image. Because in those days, the Americans tended to wear those aviator sunglasses things, you know. So
so just wasn't
a done thing for Australians. That's right. And yes, I mean, we were very, very sort of British in that element, but eventually the unit deteriorated into a workable situation. Still, the dress sense had to be upheld and things, but the psychology changed of the unit after a few months in the country. Very similar to, and I don't mind saying this, people who were there with my unit would probably vouch for it, that show on TV that we're all familiar with, MASH, hits home very readily. The humour involved in that, being American, a little bit more forward, you might say, more disrespectful of authority, but similar to what we did. But we respected authority and we tried to follow the British military system. But all these funny things happened there.
Well, you've got to tell us all of those, please. You mentioned how when you got there, it seemed that the units on their way out had switched off.
Yes.
But in general, what did you feel? What did you sense the mood as being amongst the Aussie troops and other units that were there?
Okay. If you had a lot of work to do, everyone actually went out of their way to do their work. The notable thing was, if there's any trouble and you were off duty, people would turn up, would pitch in, you know, and they didn't have to. That was the thing notable. The thing got me was that although the unit we were replacing, the guys had been switched off, you know, they'd been there for 12 months, they had it, you know, they didn't want any more of it, they just wanted to go home. But when something happened, when a chopper came in, things changed dramatically. They were back to what their job was, and they did their job. And oh, gee, all of a sudden you get this, let's say it was an impressive sight. It was an impressive feeling.
That's with the Aussies. What about what did you make of the Americans and I mean the Koreans even, their sort of morale and so on?
Koreans we didn't have much to do with because we couldn't speak the language. Almost got into a fight in one bar one time because my mate wouldn't smile because he had this shocking look on his face all the time, you know. And I said, God, bit of, you know, look, lighten up, because the Korean has had a few to drink, and these Koreans in the morning, we drove past their compound once, they did martial arts for their morning things. And this was a Korean officer too, of all things, who's had a few bit, and he was looking at my mate staring at him like that, and I thought, no, lighten up. You know, we're going to get into trouble here now. You know, we don't know martial arts or things, but eventually some Yanks. So one of the guys with us, and there are people in every group that can blend so well with other cultures. And he saw that. He said, we're going to be in trouble here. I think he just grabbed a drink and walked over to the guy and, you know, a bit of sign language, etc. Let's drink. And poof, just diffused the situation instantly. But my mate still wouldn't smile. Yeah, so sometimes how you reacted, the body language, because you don't speak the language, so it's the body language, the smiles, that's what you get across. That's the way you communicate basically all the time there.
You shared a language with the Americans though. How did you get along with those guys?
Didn't deliberately mix as such. The only shopping facilities which were of any value was their PX, where you go to as soon as you got because we were paid, You could either exchange the money for Vietnamese money, or you exchange. It was actually American money that we were given, American military money, not the American dollars. So the only place you could spend it was usually in the PX there, and that's where you could buy cameras, transistor radios, which were there, and tape recorders, which were just starting out. They didn't have cassettes; they had the little reel-to-reel things and things like that. So any goods like that, you'd buy from there. And yeah, mostly because our unit had no direct relationship, soldier to soldier, with the American base. Although there was an American hospital there, we used to ship, depending on the type of injuries. They had certain specialists. We could do certain things. So we'd either ship them there, or just either ferry them by an ambulance or by helicopter that short distance to the airfield where the American hospital was. So with the Americans we had no big deal, except typically you could get a lot of stores from the Americans. The classical thing over a card game or a bit of money exchanging, you'd be surprised what you could get. Stuff that's bound for Alaska and it ends up in Vietnam. And an American supply thing is you can't take it back. So fellas, we've got to get rid of it. You know, who wants something that's is for polar regions? Do you want to buy one, take it home to Australia?
What sort of things?
Like huge anoraks and things, with a beautiful fur on them and things like that you'd use at the North Pole. And it was shipped to the wrong area, so they had to get rid of it. Yeah, so who wanted it? One of our guys came back with an American Jeep. Wasn't allowed to keep it. Had to give it back.
How did he get his hands on that?
I don't know, over something or other. The principle, Australians had to normally bring everything back. Australians account for every little thing. We're not that rich. Americans, once they issue it to a war zone, they don't want it back. They'll leave it, sell it. Well, this is what sort of engages them in their little black market, or people who are willing to do that. You've seen it often in American movies because of just the system that they have with supplies. It's such a rich nation, or in those days, yeah. So we had to bring everything back. The Americans, no. Tip it into the sea, do something with it.
Give it to them Aussies.
Yeah. Oh, we would take it. We would take it, given the chance, yeah. We did get some equipment from them, yeah, it was good. That element was good. Anything we were short of, usually had no problems. If the Americans had it, they'd be willing to exchange it or give it to you.
Okay. Now, do you want to sort of... 8th Field Ambulances come in. Is that the name you maintain for the entirety?
Yes,
of
all our symbols, all our markings, all our documents were 8th Field Ambulance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what were your primary duties first when you arrived? Was there much establishment work required, or was it straight into the medical side of things?
Well, we had to continue the development of the unit. Being a static unit, we had to keep developing the, you might call the infrastructure of the unit, so to improve pathways. Remembering we're on sand, and the sand always blew and things like that, so you had to try to stabilise the region. Couldn't grow anything on it, except weeds, so we had to lay paths. We had to do a lot of sandbagging. There's plenty of sand to do that. So that used to stabilise surroundings and things. So all our buildings had to be surrounded by sandbags and things like that. So it was basically just to build up the pathways and to make sure that the hospital facility was in a number of rooms could be air conditioned. The actual operating theatre was conditioned. The pre-op wasn't. Not in my days. I later learnt that most of the wards were fully encased and fully air conditioned then, later.
But all the wards were in permanent structures. There wasn't anything under canvas at that time?
Not for the wards, no. But our living facilities were, but gradually changed into solid buildings as we went through. The only excitement we had early in the piece was being in canvas. Was that one night we woke up and somebody's running around screaming, "Fire, fire, fire!" And we thought, what the hell are we supposed to shoot at? We couldn't hear anyone shooting. What it was the next unit, an engineer unit, one of the tents was on fire. So that's what it was. We woke up to it quickly. But a couple of our guys were ready to shoot somebody.
So it sounds like from the minute you get there, you're on tenterhooks. I mean, you're talking about getting off the plane and thinking, we've just landed in the middle of an enemy field, airstrip or something. Yeah.
You always had to walk around with your firearms. If you're on duty in the wards, you had a rack outside the door of the ward that your firearm had to be on there. You had magazines taped. The submachine gun, just like a tube, but it's got a magazine that goes this way. with 33 rounds. So we used to tape an empty magazine to it. So you could have an empty magazine on the weapon to keep it there, and in an emergency, just clip it, reverse it, and you're ready to shoot. Unfortunately, because of our 12-hour shift, etc., one time we found one of our corporals who did the weapons inspections. You had to clean and oil your weapons every day, otherwise they'd rust. Had put the magazines back on with the live rounds on them. In a submachine gun, it's if you cock it back and leave it cocked, it's just something under pressure is open. And if that thing drops on the concrete or on the ground, it loosens the bolt, which immediately chambers a round, bang, and shoots the first round. So, we could have had a rack of guns fall over and there'd be a little bit of fireworks going around. Again, because of the pressure that everyone was under, 12-hour shift, etc. And sometimes you were a little bit vague as to what you were doing. Sometimes.
So, incredibly long hours, the stress of the job. Was there also how much tension was there in the air? Just the fact that you are in a country that is there's a war going on.
Tension wasn't that much where we were, because again, we were protected by other units. We knew that. And you'd get very few alerts. We had bodies wash up on shore. That caused an alert, because you didn't know whether there were enemy fragment or whatever was going on there. The Americans would do a sweep of that area, then we'd get all clears, because you always had your defensive positions you'd jump into in case something happened and when the alarms went up. But in our specific area, no, there wasn't much tension, because we felt pretty secure where we were.
And what was your defensive position? Where would you go on an alert?
Depending whether I was on the ward, we'd stay on duty in the ward, making sure that patients could take cover if necessary, because we were sandbagged all around by that stage. If you're in your building, you had sandbag positions outside your building that you could go to, because you always slept, you always lived with your firearm. So you always had something to fall back on. Also, not only after your 12-hour shift, normal shift, you could also be expected to do what they call picket duty, what's a guard duty, that you would do usually 2 hours on, 4 hours off, and you do it that way. And one night we almost, an officer and I nearly, we could have shot each other. Because what happened was there was a truck coming through our area of responsibility, just away from the hospital, but a truck coming and it stopped. And everyone's a picket duty now. Why has that truck stopped? Uh-oh, no one's getting out of the truck. What's going on? So ring, 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 ring. And I said, Akefield, you're responsible for this. Get out there and find out what's wrong. Yikes. And I was the guy on duty. The officer had his pistol. We come out. Not having been trained to search vehicles, we came up with a suggestion. He opens one door. I open the other door, guns at the ready. What we didn't realise was, should we have to shoot, we'd be firing at each other. But what we did, when we flung the door open, it was on my side. He was on the driver's side. He flung the door open, and there was a drunk Frenchman in there who'd been called in for a few beers at one of the units.
Yeah, so you really, let's just hear the end of that story. You got to the point where you both opened the doors, and what was inside?
So we were quite worried, because we didn't know what's going to happen, whether the vehicle was booby-trapped. That's what our main concern was in relation to that. So we didn't know whether the vehicle would blow up on the doors or nothing, but we were already in panic stations at the time, and everyone was watching us, because all the guards from the other units were going, oh, this is going to be interesting, what's going on? So as we flung the doors open, the officer was on the driver's side, and the driver slumped basically into his chest. Good thing his pistol didn't go off. There was a French, one of the French contractors, or one of the Frenchmen who'd been, who'd lived in the country, and he was stone drunk on there, and had just stalled the vehicle and had fallen asleep. So that was quite a surprise, and I don't think I slept that night. Just something as simple as that could have caused a little bit of fireworks and 2 people getting shot needlessly. Purely the way we approached it.
Yeah, well, I guess you can't be prepared for every eventuality. Some of the guys we've interviewed who were in Vung Tao's, everyone's got a different take on, different perspective, but it suggests that there was a real, even though you're not on the front line, there is an edginess about the place. I mean, the fact that little things like that, which can set you off on edge, Did you find that sort of thing to be the case? Or was it earlier on in the piece, like the guy someone yelling fire, fire? Was it a matter of getting used to?
Well, the thing you never knew what was going to happen. As a digger, you never knew what the plans were, what's in the background. Is there something going to happen that you weren't told about? So therefore you'd see something happening you'd be quite concerned about. A number of times we saw huge smoke pillars very close by going, and sometimes we found that I was somebody at the dump burning tyres or burning oil or something because you couldn't hear firing. Then the worst thing was that American jets would break the sound barrier anyway, so you'd hear explosions. You go, uh-oh, where was that? Was that a jet? Or is it closer somewhere else? An example of being on edge time would be that, again, tension, depending on what you were doing, what you're involved in. One night, again, we went to bed. I had, fortunately, not night duty. I could sleep that night. You hit your pillow, you're lying down, all of a sudden you hear, brr, brr, brr. Oh no, somebody's using a submachine gun. It's the type you use. Oh no, what's going on? You listen again. Oh, that's not in your lines, but it's not too far away. What's going on? Oh, dear me. Oh, I'm not being called. Fast asleep. In the morning we found out it was one of the other units, a guard had snuck into the kitchen, going around doing the check. It snuck into the kitchen, not knowing that the cook was going a little bit troppo. And the cook was up there doing something, hidden away in the kitchen. So the guard went in to make a sandwich. And the cook got very upset about this, got his weapon off the guy and stood him up against the pots and pans and started shooting around him. That's what the burping was. So he shot up a lot of pots and pans, thoroughly scared the guard out of his wits. And then the other guards came, overpowered the cook, and the cook ended up in our ward under great sedation and was eventually shipped home. But just people break again. So there must have been tension, but I think it all had to do with, again, with your impression of what you were doing and how much other pressure from different areas you were subjected to. Yeah, so sometimes you were worried, but not so much from attacks on you personally from the periphery. I didn't really find that personally.
Mm. Okay, well, let's talk a bit more about the work you were doing. Which you were sort of stationed to a particular ward for starters, were you?
Generally, yes. The social diseases ward and the officers ward, which contained 6-bed ward, and usually the officers had nothing serious with them, back problems or needed a skin graft or something that wasn't too great. So you had a fairly easy time there, either just giving routine injections, routine delivery of drugs to them, things like that. So I could be called away at any time from there, and they could quickly call someone in who didn't need to specialise in another area. The guys who worked in intensive care, yeah, they had to have a little bit more training. They had to be specialised to react quickly to certain medical emergencies.
All right, and okay, so that's the officers' ward, social diseases, which is basically
VD.
Yep. How busy was that ward?
Well, we got those fellas out there sandbagging and things like that, which they thought it was against the Geneva Convention to do that as patients. But yeah, basically, besides doing the morning treatment, doing sample taking for the laboratory, and hitting them with penicillin on a regular basis, there was not much work in there at all. So that was good. That was considered a cushy position if you got it. But I had it nearly all the time because I had to be called off to do other things. So that was the main area. Now, if I got called off, I could be called off for up to 8 hours. Because once you're in the operating theatre, not only did I have to take photos, I couldn't stand around there doing nothing. And they'd hand me things, they'd ask me to move things, I'd go fetch things, things like that.
Okay, well, let's sort of focus on each of those roles. Once just focus on perhaps you've got the officers, the VD clinic. If you could sort of talk us through the routine, a typical day in those wards, starting with the officers, perhaps.
Okay, you'd start on shift. You'd be briefed from the previous person what you'd have them on charts anyway. So there's routine things that you have to do. Check blood pressure, pulse, temperature, things like that, fairly routinely. No matter what you had, that had to be done on a routine basis. Put on the chart. There's a follow through. You made sure you gave them their treatment, their rebandaging, cleaning of wounds or anything else that had to be done. taking any samples that you had to do, and then just making sure the paperwork was done, that the ward was clean. That was a basic thing, so that was fairly spot on. That wasn't too great, unless the particular routine, if it was a post-op, cleaning the wound, maintaining cleanliness, that could take a little bit longer. There were more things to do. Your normal injection giving sequence. Apart from that, there's no pressure at all. In that.
How big was that ward? How many beds would you have had in there?
The VD ward would have contained about 20 beds. Officers only 6 beds.
So it would have just been you've been on duty by yourself, or how many were there?
Usually you only had to be there by yourself, because you always had the sisters, and then we had a number of female sisters, all officers, who were the experienced ones, who they would take the direct orders from the doctors. They were the ones who impart the information to you, and if you needed help, they'd be the ones to come in, because they could do all these unusual procedures that you couldn't do, because they'd done all that in civilian hospitals and places like that. So if you had anyone who's tubes hanging out of them, drips and things, they were the ones who were authorised to change the drips, inject drugs into the drips, things like that. So you had always someone to call on from that element.
Okay, so you've been working in the officers' ward and the social diseases ward. What happens if an officer gets VD? Where's he sent?
Officers' ward. Oh yes. No, we're very British. No, you keep the officers separated from the men all the time. Yeah. I think we only had one. One officer. Yeah. Otherwise, they'd ship them to the American hospital, because officers never got VD.
Of course not.
No. Yeah. Yeah, there's ways and means of dealing with that. There was some strange things I won't go into, but it was a sort of a giggle throughout the case. The doctor thought it was a giggle, one particular officer.
You've got to tell us.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. He believed the story was he had constipation, so he thought, well, no good with paper, so instead of taking something, he ended up with, the old razors, the handle, the metal handle, he ended up with that in his rectum. So that was, that had to be removed medically, surgically, you might say. So that was, the poor guy never got over that. But they kept him for observations for a couple of days, I think, just to teach him a lesson. Yeah, so that got around.
He was an officer, did you say?
Yeah.
American?
No. We only treated Australians. Yeah. None of the Americans would take theirs back straight away. It's only if there was an extreme emergency and we had Americans mixed up with Australians, we would have to treat them immediately, and then when it was safe to do so, we could transfer them out. Yeah. At one stage, we had, unbeknown, a large action at Caradon. We got a lot of casualties coming in, and a lot of our unit was down at they had set up a recreation area further down the beach where we mixed with Americans. It was a sort of all forces type area, and the word got around. All 8 field ambulance people moved back. There's been a battle. We need all assistance. So we all ran up back the beach, along the beach, to get back to our unit. What we didn't realise was the Yanks thought they'd help the Aussies. They all piled on a truck, drove around the other way to give blood to help their Aussie mates. So what had happened was, we were doing all this, these black Americans and big American league players or something that hopped out and, drunk as skunks, coming up and saying, saying, we're here to help, we're here, we'll give blood, full of alcohol, and all these casualties, and the surgeons didn't know what to do, and because they were too busy, but it's surprising what a woman can do. And, a couple of it, because our women wore the white veils, and Americans were shocked, wow, what's this? So two of the women went out and calmed these big Americans down and said, thank you so much. Oh, thank you for coming, etc. But look, we're right. We've got all the blood we need. Look, just go back and think of the guys, but have a few beers back at the pub. Unfortunately, they got back on the truck. It's an open truck. The guy put it in the wrong gear, took off, and we had gravel paving, took off, and about 4 of them fell off. Got gravel rash, which is serious in the tropics. So we had to keep them too, until we could fix them up and send them back to the Yanks. Oh, fun and games. Guys everywhere.
If only they'd given their blood just before that, they could have then recycled their own blood.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Now you probably were involved with the dust-offs as well, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Okay, most of our injuries always came in by dust-off, whether it's the marked helicopters with a Red Cross, which were the official dust-off choppers, or any chopper, even mounted with machine guns, etc. They were fitted out to take casualties in stretchers, and they're all fitted out either to take 2 or up to 4 casualties, depending on how their internal workings were. Now, we normally got a warning that they were coming in. Normally, if there was a position where Australians were going to be involved in any predicted battles or anything like that, we would be on standby. We would be ready. We would have rosters organised and things like that. And what would happen is that quite often the first thing you hear would be from the orderly room. The radio used to be on fairly frequently. It was on a particular channel that the helicopters would only use. So we were either getting helicopters, American helicopters in a dust-off field, Australian helicopters that had to get onto the emergency frequency or the medical frequency, or naval helicopters that might be delivering something to do with naval supplies. I think naval were Albatross. Americans had all sorts of call signs. But our call sign everyone liked very much. Being medics, they considered us bloodsuckers. And we fortunately got the call sign vampire. So Americans used to love coming in and calling, whether they were recording it or not, I don't know, but saying, vampire, vampire, this is flight, something, so it's coming in. We'll be on deck in 10 minutes, Is that a Roger? And you get, yes, and I love that thing, vampire, vampire. So that stuck, and we actually, our football club was called Vampire, and a big bat was our symbol and things like that. And that was carried through, I believe, to One Field Hospital that eventually eventuated from our position. Vampire was the thing that they used as a call sign, and even on their webpage at the moment, I think. Their webpage is entitled Call Sign Vampire, with the stories involved there. Typical topics. You get so much radio traffic, the guys in the orderly room would be working, you wouldn't be listening to anything on the radio. As soon as the word, no matter how quiet came on, the word vampire, everything stopped. It just stopped, just like an alarm. And somebody dashed to the phone, ready to take down all the details, how many wounded were coming in, what their conditions were, so we could immediately prepare. What it was, as soon as that happened, an alarm would sound. People who were on that particular shift, who were rostered, would immediately prepare. There was a time sequence. You would rush out. There was an area where you picked up stretchers, or the chopper may be carrying stretchers. Well, the usual thing was, you got a stretcher off the chopper, you gave one back. So you'd be ready with stretchers to give them while you're taking, because you never changed the person from a stretcher. Any movement of them caused them more aggravation. So you had that ready, on standby. Chopper would come in, land, you'd be clear of the blades, you'd come in, and depending on how many people had to be evacuated, that's how many you had on standby. Because you really, to move an adult, you'd need at least 4 people to do it properly. 2, doing one adult can drop them, and that's not good if the person is genuinely ill to do that. And that was a constant thing. And where you hear people from Vietnam saying the most memorable thing, or the thing that really gets them aggravated, is the sound of the Iroquois helicopter, those chop, 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 chop of those blades. And everyone at, I think, Eightfield Ambulance, who worked at the hospital, knows that sound. And that stirs you when you hear that. Even on some of the choppers that fly around today, we've got the similar engines and blades. You never forget that.
Mm-hmm. And what would your personal involvement be when the dust
my job was, if there were sufficient guys out there, I would be out there with a camera to record every step as it came in, record for our unit the particular casualties coming in, because we could get anything from military personnel, Viet Cong, people from villages coming in. And unfortunately, sometimes by the time they get to us, they're already deceased, and therefore we have to treat them in that particular way. And this was so interesting from the type of injuries, because you'd get people with very open injuries, multiple injuries, where the particular medic in the field wouldn't have had the number of dressings to cover the one body. And what interested me was that the body had shut down and gone into such shock that the wounds weren't bleeding. This was the surprising thing. You'd expect wounds to be spurting blood everywhere, but only the major wounds would be covered, the others would be left. And no, as you're coming off, and there might be dribbling, but no great things, because the body had just shut down. I think there's been writings about it regarding that. Normally, the period from injury to the time we got them was about half an hour. So the surgeons were keeping records of all of these things to see, what the survivability factor was for people injured, and some people were very, very severely injured in these areas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you saw some really, we've seen some of the photos, some pretty grisly stuff. Had your time at the Alfred, for example, prepared you in any way for what you were going to see?
I thought it was very helpful. That's right, yeah. Initially, when some of the medics, because we used to have also drivers who no medical training as such, also standing by, they'd volunteer their time, for this to happen, or they were just passing by when the alarm went off, and they'd look around, we're short of guys, so they'd immediately drop what they were doing and come in and be ready to pick up, and just the look on their faces, of seeing some of the wounds, you could tell that they were just able, in their own shock, to carry the stretcher. It was so evident on that. So anything from massive wounds to people already covered up to one notable thing was they brought in a Vietnamese teenager who must have been helping Australians, but it appears later that a grenade had gone off somewhere, and when we brought him in we knew he was deceased because that was reported from the chopper, and we moving his body, and we thought, all he had was a pair of shorts on and he was completely naked everywhere. We thought, well, what's killed him? There's nothing there. Can't see anything. Strange. But by the time we got there, the doctor started investigating him, and all he had was on his inner thigh was one hole. One hole, little finger, you could push in it. And what it was, it appears that the part of the grenade that blew off had gone into the inner thigh, punctured the femoral artery, and he'd bled internally, and just from shock of that had died, but not bled out.
God.
Yeah, so that was another revelation, and you think, well, what's killed him? There's no blood. Things like that.
So, just talk us through what happens next. The Iroquois come with the casualties. Whoever's on hand grabs stretchers, takes them off. Then what's the next?
Okay, they bring them straight to we used to roughly call it pre-op, or the modern world I think is triage, where the people are brought in to be assessed by the doctors. So the doctors quickly go around. Generally, the casualty would have a tag on him saying what was wrong, because some of these people are already heavily sedated with morphine, so they've got the markings on the foreheads and writings and on these documents. Surgeons go around trying to pick the most urgent cases first. Other cases at time to say, well, look, we can leave them for a little bit, or their fluids are placed into them. They got ready for that. Maybe their painkillers are adjusted for the areas. They could be left outside, lying out of the sun, hopefully, but lying around the ward, people running around them, etc. The doctors inside the triage could work on at least 4 cases on there at the moment. There'd be one anaesthetist. All the rest of the doctors would be doing assessments of what needed to be done. The ones preparing for operation would be stripped of clothing, any equipment, etc., being prepared for surgery. Sometimes the people would come in actually almost clothing blown off them, just from the nature of the blast. Except the boots. The boots were so tightly on that you can't blow them off unless you blew the leg off. But that was one of the things. And they'd be assessed. They would then go into the operating theatre. Operating theatre was always set up ready. And there was 2 tables in there, always ready to go. 2 operations always going, mostly, simultaneously. The anaesthetist going between the pair of surgical cases. The nursing sisters sometimes would be performing actual surgery on minor parts of the body while these surgeons would be operating on organs, things like that. And the thing that used to get me was, I truly believe I've seen miracles performed there where we were asked, and I was asked, to shut the air conditioning off because the anaesthetist couldn't hear the heartbeat. And the anaesthetist would be listening and it was dead quiet, nothing. And all of a sudden the anaesthetist would either go like that or down like that. So we either rushed the body out or continued operating, switching the air conditioning back on. So, it was touch and go many times, and I really thought that the surgeons would really fight desperately to keep the people alive. Yeah. So, and if there was only 1 or 2 casualties, they had all the time in the world to to do as best as they could in that same operation. They'd operate for hours sometimes on the people, and that was great. That was really great to see in relation to that. But that was all the time, and at one stage we were called off from a barbecue. We had a football barbecue after a football match down by the beach, and unexpected casualties were flown in. And what happened was that everyone was recalled. I have photos of one of the anaesthetists working in his little green gown in footy shorts. And I had to ask the anaesthetist to take his thongs off because the floor of the operating theatre was like a bath, slightly edged, so the fluids could be contained in there, supposedly drain out of one hole. And because you use a lot of flushing of organs and things with saline solution, plus all the blood that used to come out, the floor was always wet, up to about a centimetre. And what happens when you wear thongs? Flip, flip. It was getting on my camera. So I had to ask the surgeon to take his thongs off. Because I'd have a dirty lens. I couldn't do the work for them. So it got to that stage. But no, the surgeons were brilliant in their work there.
Yeah. Obviously, your role here is to be taking a visual record of what's going on. Were there times when it became so hectic that you had to put the camera down? And
yes, at times, because something like an amputation or something can become routine, and because of the number of casualties, you'd either be the person who's liaising between the operating theatre and the doctors in the triage, passing messages backwards and forth, or some of the things which were unpleasant, like to actually pick up the limb and take it out into a special facility to be discarded later. That I found rather difficult myself. Quite often, if there were body parts that had to be taken out in dishes, unfortunately, we used to let some of the other staff, non-medical staff, there used to be a viewing window. We used to let them watch, because the more you're interested in the subject, the more helpful you can be. And quite often, we'd have to be careful as you took that out. You'd get these people collapsing, so you'd have to look after them. So you had to be careful what was going on. Yeah, but I'd be used anywhere that it was so busy that, no, look, Ziggy, put the camera down and come in and do this. Yeah, go in at one particular stage. I'm A negative. It's not that popular. A negative, I think, yeah. Blood. And they got one person in, and it was in such a hurry that they said, the doctors knew who had what blood around them. They said, quick, Zig, on the couch, not a couch, on the stretcher, lie down. So off I get. I knew exactly what was going to happen. They prepared my hand ready. They actually had the tube in there ready, and there was going to be person-to-person transfer of blood. And they said, I'm ready to go. Oh, gee, not feeling very comfortable in myself. And all of a sudden, I feel this thing being pulled out, because I couldn't watch it myself, being given. They pulled it out and said, off you get, go out and help. What happened? He's passed away. So, things like that used to happen. In some of the cases, as soon as they decided someone's deceased, they can't operate anymore. So, next.
Incredible experience.
Mm.
So, what were you looking for as the photographer? What did you need to be recording?
Out in triage, it was mainly how the people came in, how they were first aided, and what treatment had been given in the field. You could tell by the type of bandages that were admitted, the way the body was twisted, or limbs, and how it was splintered, or anything like that. That was to be kept, and basically of the human interest part of it, of our work, the type of work we did. In the actual operating theatre, it was always colour film that I had to use. Normally, unless I brought my personal camera in, which was the same type of camera the Army had given me, that would contain black and white film. The military film was colour slides for the surgeons, who would actually pinpoint at certain stages, say, step in, I want a shot of that, I want a shot at this angle, etc. And that's what I would do. As an example was the element of one of the diggers who was shot in the back of the head. And when we got him in, before they shaved his head, the back of the bullet was just poking out, a nice little copper-coloured finger-like protrusion out of the back of the head. They looked at that and they said, oh, this is going to be serious. The patient was unconscious at the time. It was fairly stabilised, so the surgeons had no great panic on him, but then they started, the head was shaved, They drilled 3 holes in strategic positions around the wound, submitted, there's certain wires that they can do, sawed the piece of skull out, opened the wound, asking me to take photos at each stage. When they removed the bullet very gently, they found that the meninges, the skin of the brain, had just been lacerated a little bit. The brain looked very neat, no blood coming from the brain. The surgeons gave a sigh of relief, cleaned up a bit of bone that they dropped. And they had special material that they could also pack in there, which I was told later causes oxygen or something, which is some bacteria doesn't like oxygen. So they packed that in, put the bone back into its little position, bandaged the head neatly, made sure there was no bleeding there, and sent him off to the ward, actually to the intensive care for a while for that. And the gentleman survived that quite neatly. He was blind for a couple of weeks, I believe, because of the sight area where he got hit. And I met him eventually in Australia with a huge crop of black hair that I didn't recognise him, never seen him without his hair on. And he recognised me and shook my hand and said, look, that's fantastic, thank you for the photos that you took. My family's got them. But there's some other very curious incidents that we've resulted from accidents that may have happened. Usually all the things that you see, and even in now in Iraq and Gulf War and all of this, and the military should be quite positive about answering it. Look, you've got young troops, you've got people who think they're infallible and they're Superman and never going to die. So people take risks, and unfortunately accidents happen and things. One of the examples is people are never thorough enough. We had one instance where engineers were cleaning out boxes of grenade boxes, and they were empty, so they were throwing them into the tip to burn it, new it out. They were just throwing them in afterwards. Well, if you don't take all the grenades out, what do you think is going to happen in a fire? So one of these guys, they're tossing grenades, and he turned around, and the fire pit exploded with the grenade. So he got injured, and a couple of other engineers got injured, and they were flown into us. Because all the soot and everything was blown onto him, the other 2 characters had to have immediate attention surgically. Because I'd already taken the photographs and there was nothing much to take shots of, I was told, can you take him and get him cleaned up? Because he's covered in soot that had been blown onto him. So fair enough. And because they were working outdoors in the sunlight, in a secure position, they only had their shorts on and their boots. So eventually I said, yeah, take your, we did his boots. But the interesting thing was, although he had soot all over him, you could see blood running through the soot. And the surgeons did a quick check, etc. And he's fit enough. Get him cleaned. We can't even find all the wounds. He's so dirty. So walked him into the showers, and there he is in the showers, praying, shivering from fear and shock, because he's been injured and he doesn't know how badly. And I said, you're all right, you're not as bad as your mate. And he's just mumbling a prayer, and he's shaking like this. And I got him under the water, and every time I got him clean eventually, but every time I wiped something off him, red ooze just came out of multiple little holes in his body. And the American grenades were just smooth shell, and inside the serrated wire, wound around tightly, and it's the wire bits that fly out, meant to cause a lot of minor injuries instead of deadly effect as such. So he was there, he was doing all this, and the interesting factor was that I cleaned him up as best I could. I couldn't clean him any further, so I couldn't stop the bleeding. Well, there's too much of it. So, wrapped a towel around his midriff and said, come on, let's go back, they've got to stop something. And everyone was peering through the ward windows. What's going on? What's Ziggy got? And this poor chap, red-headed chap, white as a ghost, I'm leading him out. He's got a towel around his midriff, walking barefooted, and everywhere his footprints went, there's bloody footprints, all the way back to the theatre. And people just looking down going, oh, no, so he had minor things, and then as he was recovering eventually, sort of scratching himself or playing cards, well, there's another bit. Because your body rejects a lot of these things if they're not deep. It just keeps rejecting foreign matter, and it would be, here's another bit to put in my collection.
So how much information would you get, or description would you get of the accident or, the event that's happened that's injured people? So
usually the surgeons, the doctors get it. We're just told we've got so many coming, be prepared for such and such, but no further details we wouldn't be getting. So we were lucky to know how many were actually landing by helicopter. Usually it was correct information, usually.
You mentioned before that, maybe you just use this as an example, but 17 people coming in one day. Was that a lot?
A great deal. That was the most we ever had in one period. Some of them were walking wounded. They could walk in and basically, as long as we kept them comfortable, their wounds could be treated hours later. So there was no great urgency. Give them a cigarette, and they were so happy to have survived. You could see it on their faces that they're not in immediate danger. They're somewhere where they know that they're going to get treatment. They know there's guys there all cleanly shaven and fresh uniforms on, etc. They knew they were safe. They didn't worry so much about the pain. They knew that they hadn't lost a leg or an arm, so therefore they were quite, thank God, so relieved. Usually it's so, we always worked on the priorities and things, and some of the guys, just the nature of the injuries, they couldn't sit up, couldn't get up, but I'm not sure how many we lost that day, but that was the most I think we ever had in one hit. So it was a bit of bedlam at the time.
Can imagine. I mean, how many stretcher cases could they fit in an Iroquois?
I think 4, because they can tier them. As far as I remember, they could put 4, but we normally only got 2 at a time, because they can put them on the floor. The crewmen either sit on the sides, depending on the type of chopper, because the dust-offs had no guns. The fighting choppers had 2 machine guns on hanging off either side, so therefore they had less room, because the crewmen had to move around. They'd have 2 crewmen, because they'd have 2 pilots, 2 crewmen, so the crewmen can operate the guns. The dust-off, I think, is 1 crewman and 2 pilots.
So they'd bring in the first load, then they'd be going back for more pickup, so it would be constant like that?
No, they won't go back. It's all done at the spot. You only do 1 flight, because you've got to get them in quick. So you don't have the time to get their drop and go back. So whatever the injuries are, if it's safe enough for the choppers to land, they come in, land. There could be a fleet of them, because that's the only way you used to travel. It's all by air. I mean, it's surprising that was so many years ago, and even now, for you or I to travel by helicopter, it's still a big deal now, and expensive to do it. Yet over there, that was the most common way to travel. We were fortunate that as long as we were with Americans, you could go to any airfield as long as you're in uniform, and you could hitch a ride to anywhere. A couple of our guys actually had a couple of days off and got told off because they ended up on the DMZ up near North Vietnam, they call it swanning around, touring. It was in a war zone, just for hitching rides on American aeroplanes, things like that. We actually, I don't know if anyone else has mentioned it from our days, but that show, Good Morning Vietnam, the character was during my time there, and we used to actually record his voice. Because what wasn't shown in that film where Robin Williams played the character, that he actually started his programs every morning, dead on 8 o'clock, with good, and he'd drag it out as long as he could, Good Morning Vietnam, and then go into his spiel. And we always listened to how long his breath could last on it. And one time we were working, we knew it was going to come up, the radios were set, working around, and all of a sudden, what was wrong? The radio's going, something's wrong. We were all looking around. He never introduced us. He just started, Good Morning Vietnam, and went straight into it. We were so expecting him to do this long drawn out thing, he didn't do it. And we thought, we couldn't identify what went wrong until somebody said, he didn't do his normal thing in the morning. And again, something like that, and I'm sure I've got that on a little disc, a real disc at home somewhere amongst my mementos. I've got nowhere to play it now, but I've got that man's voice making that presentation, because we thought it was all unique, quite unique even in those days. We couldn't understand his American politics that he used to give on the radio, because we thought, that's on Americans. And we used to think, how could he get away with saying things like this? Because we always thought he was an American military person. How could he get away saying things like that in between his the DJ type music he used to put on and things? So there's another little side issue there.
You've talked a little bit about what your process was in photographing operations and stuff. I'd just like to explore that a bit more. Would you be documenting the step-by-step process of an operation? So from the point at which the patient is brought into the theatre and their wounds are fresh off the battlefield, so to speak, and then the procedure that the surgeon and the assistants...
Normally not exactly step by step, but what you would do is the surgeon would want recorded what the person's body looked like at the beginning. That's where they decided to take it further, that the person was alive. So you would attempt to photograph the particular wound or the worst wounds, and then the surgeon would get to work on them, and the surgeon would call you when at any particular stage the surgeon thought, I need this recorded because this is some unique thing I'm doing that I've never done before or whatever. So that's when. So sometimes I'd only be in the theatre and I'd take about 2 or 3 shots. Sometimes I'd go through the whole roll, have to go out for another roll of film.
But you would be directed by the surgeon?
Exactly, directed, exactly, yes. Yep.
I know that wasn't an official photograph, but there is a photograph in there of the man who's lying and the shot is from his feet, like straight up his body, and the doctor's massaging him.
Yeah.
Was there a particular reason you took that shot in that way?
Yes, because that was triage. That was before going into the operating theatre. And he was a person who was brought in with a chest wound directly into the chest. And he was actually, because there was a number of people brought in the same day, I was actually carrying part of the stretcher as we came in. And this person was moving and alive. When we got him in, the surgeons were already investigating other people there. And usually someone sits with the stretcher or sits with a particular person. And this particular person said something. And, I said, okay. And I was wondering why the surgeons were passing him by. And I said, doctor, look, sir, I've just been talking to him. He said, you can't. I said, why? He's been shot through the heart. I said, what? And they said, I've just been talking to him. So I said, what? And they put him onto the off the ground, put him onto the frames that we have where you saw in the photograph where the surgeon can actually look down on the person, and actually his legs at one photo move back and forward. The surgeon, the look on his face, go, what? And then they checked. They said, no, his heart's not going. And then immediately, because they actually saw him move, that's when they started doing external heart compressions, and they heard a very unusual, I could only describe it as a squishing sound inside the chest, which means there was, first of all, air was escaping from the chest through the wound, and there's fluid sounds in there. And the surgeon said, look, he's shot in the heart. And we said, but I was just talking to him, trying to convince the surgeon, and the surgeon had seen him move. So quickly the surgeon put his hand, an open hand, straight in through the hole, felt around and said, no, look, he's dead. I mean, he's shot through the left or right ventricle. He says, it's there, take him off. And that was shock to me because, from what I considered, because he spoke, that he'd survived half an hour in an aeroplane flight with a bullet through his chest. And that's in the photograph. Now, I don't know how they documented that or whatever, because again, they made the decision right there that, but that was a serious chest wound. They couldn't operate on a person's heart. No way. Not even if they liked to. They wouldn't have been able to do it. But just the element that the person had lasted that long. One thing that's always surprised me was, because I was so closely involved in that area, the triage area, that you see this in movies quite often when you see the hero or their sidekick has been shot, and you see them lying there and they say their final words. I've seen that 3 times, where people have come off the chopper, still alive, get there, and they're either asking for their parents, or one guy just tried to get up on the side and said, look, I'm all right. What's wrong with my mates? And he just said that and just sort of slumped back. And when the surgeons come, no, check him out. No, he's gone. It's 3 times I personally have heard, face to face, near their face, people saying things to me, and then they pass out. They live all that time, and they pass out, but they do say their final words. I found that a little bit disturbing, I suppose, but unusual. And I think, well, I've seen it in the movies too often, but it does happen in real life. That final bit, or that final bit of life, they carry on till that moment.
Did this take an emotional toll on you, day after day?
Well, not there. I don't think so. See, because we were young, and this is what we were expecting. And you might say this common word, gung-ho. This was our work. This is what we prided ourselves being able to do. So in those days, it didn't affect us. I don't remember it affecting us. But when we got back to Australia, and when you have a time to reminisce, and when you consider as you grow older, family attachments and things that happen within families and relationships to people, etc., then it dawns on you what effect that one person passing away could have had to many, many more people, although to you it was a daily chore to see that happening, because you weren't their friend. What did play on you was the fact that we had a person who came through the VD ward, came through with an injury to his back, a gunshot wound, and the next time he came through, he was dead. 3 times we had him in the hospital through his term, and the final trip he had to us, he'd been killed. And we knew him. That hurt.
You knew him because he had visited
He'd been
the
a patient.
hospital?
That's right, yeah. You'd had a beer with him as a patient, you'd given him injections and things, and he kept going back to his unit because, it wasn't life-threatening things that he had. And he was able to be picked up, and he was a good guy, so he had no problems. But the last time we saw his body, and it's a race, a couple of vehicles did. You get so lackadaisical, day in, day out doing something, and typical young guys, they thought, we'll race these vehicles. And unfortunately, there was an ambush set up on this particular day. So the vehicle that won got shot. Both drivers, both people got killed in that vehicle, and he was one of them. So that was difficult.
That must break your heart a bit. I mean, it's something so unnecessary.
Unnecessary, yes, and especially when you knew them, This is it. This is where the guys in the field who were their friends, who were in the same unit, that would have much more impact on them to see what had happened in relation to that.
You said that you were also called on to take photographs for non-medical reasons as well?
Yes, mostly in Vietnam it was medical reasons, or where we went into villages to help out. Our unit did work in the villages. It was almost like adopting a village. So our unit was always there doing regular medical checkups and things like that. And the surgeons, the doctors were quite happy because you give them a shot of penicillin or something and all of a sudden, bang, miracle cure to them because they'd never experienced that type of drug before. So it worked very well. It's on Australians who've been used to antibiotics, etc., that things were a little bit more difficult in those times. But back in Australia, yes, I was called upon to take shots of things that I didn't know about. But in Vietnam, there were things of a medical nature that I was called in. I suppose the unusual places would be for actual autopsies. And when you consider, well, why would you take a photograph, or why would you do an autopsy on a battle casualty? Because they weren't battle casualties as such.
How do you mean?
Well, things happen out there, and let's say from my experiences, and then my experiences once I became an officer, was that you have to treat Australian troops as individuals, as people. You don't downgrade your people. You look after your people. And if you don't, there are repercussions for doing things. If your troops don't respect you, things can happen. And I won't go any further on that. But yeah, so therefore a number of autopsies were held for that, and
To prove the cause of death?
to document the cause of death, purely to document it. One of them got into the newspapers. There was a trial. In regards to that, would you believe the actual person flew back on the same plane with me And we didn't know why we were kept in the plane. While a couple of black limousines turned up at the airport, and a couple of military police with the gentlemen were marched off the plane. Didn't know. And we were too busy drinking on the aircraft because it was a civilian aircraft when we flew back to Australia. And it was a big thing in the newspapers, etc. And the person got away with it eventually because he was charged incorrectly. He was charged on worse service, and Australia was never at war. Technical matter.
Oh.
So it wasn't the papers, and I can say that.
Yeah, well, what
But
was the story?
Well,
Public,
a guy had killed his officer, and he was charged over it because they were able to prove it. But one of the things I learnt was, we were speaking before about the effects of grenades. I suppose I could say this. The chap would, he had a humorous element to him. We got a patient in one time, chopper came in at night. I wasn't asked to photograph it because I didn't have to do much to him. He'd been blown up in a grenade explosion, drinking too much, and we always carried firearms, and this was at Newey Down. He had a beef about his sergeant, and he was going to do his sergeant in with a grenade, and all his mates thought, ha, ha, ha. So they all stumbled after him. Yeah, he had the grenade, and he said, I'm going to get that bastard in the thing. Unfortunately, he fumbled around, whether he meant it or not, but he dropped the grenade and the pin flew off. The handle flew off, meaning the grenade was armed. All his brave mates shot out because they knew the results of it. He bent down to pick up the grenade, and it went bang. He lost one hand and fingers off the other hand and got a few minor cuts. That's, and that's by picking up a grenade which went off. Just lost a hand, a hand and fingers off the other because he picked it up like that. And then later on I was talking to him in the ward and I said, jeepers, after he recovered and everything, saying, God, why did you do that? Because we heard the story, what he did. And he says, utter stupidity, utter stupidity. He says, look, he said, well, baby stuff. He says, jeepers, won't put me off drinking now. That was his end. But, again, it's just the attitude and utter stupidity. I shouldn't have done it. His mates never thought he would. It's just that he dropped the thing, he fumbled it all through his drink and bang, it went off.
That's a pretty minor injury though, really, isn't it?
No, not when you lose your hand. So his hand and fingers off the other hand, the rest he just had those minor perforations. So, yeah, it was okay. I don't think they even charged him because they thought he suffered enough from being so stupid. But then again, I had to photograph a body where somebody was sleeping in a pit and somebody threw a grenade in there. And from what I saw of the body, I would swear that the person had been raked up and down by machine gun fire. What had happened was the explosion had ricocheted the shrapnel backwards and forwards inside there. So from one bang, he got a number of... His body was ripped to shreds, really. All I could tell was that he had a moustache. Couldn't tell you what his face was like or anything. All I knew is he had a moustache.
Why did you have to photograph him?
Again, because it was an unusual case. They needed proof, an autopsy of, for their records and things. And I don't know how they documented that particular thing. So there was a number of other cases where autopsies were done. And all I could say is that, let's say, the reports that went back to the families was compassionate death due to war injuries, battle injuries, although that may not have been the case.
So you were told what was going on when these autopsies were done?
No, and the doctors didn't talk about what caused it. They had to report on the actual physical condition. So they did, and they said, photo. It's just that my first autopsy I saw, because they, if you watch CSI on television, the sort of major slaughter, and just the way they finish it, I thought, oh, and the surgeon looked at me and said, and must have seen my expression and said, I don't think St. Peter will mind. And we left it at that. You couldn't do neat things there, and after what I've seen in coroner's offices, because I had worked in the funeral industry here in Australia for about 6 months too, so it wasn't that much difference there. To me, it was a first-time experience, and I was a bit shocked at what I saw, but to the surgeon, this was just routine type autopsy and how you left the body.
If there was a bullet or shrapnel of some sort inside the body that had been fired from, like, was friendly fire, so it was either American or Australian weapon, would that be obvious? Would that be something you'd photograph?
Not necessarily, unless the wound was unusual. Because it was friendly fire, usually you know about it. Then it's all documented. We've had Australian troops ambush each other accidentally. And we brought both sides in, both groups in, because they did a lot of damage to each other. Fortunately, no one died. But the humour of it was, we had them on stretchers lying down, and one person had lost a finger, someone had damage to their eye, people had damage to the rest of the bits and pieces of their bodies, and then they were lying there, and they're arguing and saying, wait till I get out of here, I'll fix you, shooting at me, and all that sort of, good-naturedly, because they knew, thank God, they weren't seriously wounded, they haven't lost limbs, and, with the finger, as far as they were concerned, they're alive. And this is the big thing, that the thankfulness on the people's face to know that they're alive, and sure, they might have lost, in some instances, have lost a limb, but hey, I'm alive. I've survived this. I've been in Vietnam, I've survived. They knew it was a go-home free card. That's all they cared about. So the thankfulness you could see, and, they were much cooperative patients for there, but the humour of this, both sides shot each other up and arguing and saying, wait till I get out, and, I'm not going to buy you a drink, things like that. So it happens.
I heard about someone who'd been shot somewhere in the jungle, but had a bit of an idea of where he thought the bullet had come from, but it wasn't confirmed until he was opened up and they found that the bullet was an American bullet. So that's what I'm wondering is, in the course of your work doing these autopsies, do you recognise if a bullet is pulled out of a body? Are you able to recognise where that may have come from?
You should, well, depending on the type of firearm used, because Americans didn't use the 9mm pistols that we used, so the pistols were fairly obvious. Submachine guns were different, and the American rifles were the M16, which had a smaller round than the Australian ones. We had the NATO huge rounds that we used, same as the Viet Cong AK-47s. So, we could tell. If it was an American one, we could tell, because at that time, Australians weren't using the American weapons. Later, yes, we started using their weapons. We had their machine guns, which used the standard big rounds, or the 7.62mm that we had. So their machine guns, the M60 had that type of round. Yeah. So if that fired, you couldn't tell whether it was Australian or whatever. You wouldn't go to all that trouble. The agreement would be, if friendly forces are together and a bullet is fired, normally you can tell, it's probably friendly fire. What are you going to do about it? There's not much you can do sometimes about it. We've had instances where we've had a guy they're having a break in the jungle, sitting back, having a smoke, had his arm resting on the log, having a smoke. Thankfully, he's having a rest. All of a sudden, out of the blue, nowhere, thunk! Ah! His hand's pinned to the log by a bullet. Just come out of the sky, bonk, straight through. But it went through the bony structure. So all it left is a hole. We had to clean it up, and a bit of physio, and he's okay. I think we actually kept him on. I don't think we sent him home. But that's his story. Just sitting there out of the blue, this thing just fell out of the sky and thunk and pinned his hand to the thing. If it was fired at close range, it would have gone right through and blown his hand apart.
So,
an unusual thing.
Was it identified where that bullet had come from?
No, it was a 7.62, something similar. So it could have been an enemy round. We don't know. We weren't sure what it was, but they couldn't hear any firing. So I don't know how these things can travel over 3 miles. These things. So sometimes, depending on the nature of where you are, you can't hear the sound, although they're fairly loud. So all of these strange things do happen. With unusual conditions or people hurting themselves, we have one which I've documented in photos too, is the element that at my time they had Paul Hasluck, the then Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs, came through, big dignitary, everyone knew him. Okay, so that he was brought through and he's coming through, yes, hello, etc. Comes up into one of our just outside the intensive care room, and there's a gentleman lying on his stomach there. And Paul Hasluck come, and I'm taking the photos as a dignitary, so I'm there, and I could hear every word. And I've got photos of Paul Hasluck, but not the patient, unfortunately, because it was too close quarters. And Paul Hasluck says, "Hello, I'm Paul Hasluck," and the young patient lying on his stomach says, "Gee, I know, sir, yes." And he says, "Oh, look, what happened to you, son?" And he says, "Oh, look, shot in the bum, sir." And he says, "Oh, ha, 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 ha." He says, "One of theirs or one of ours?" "No, sir, one of mine." He shot himself, accidentally. Climbing over a very slippery log in the jungle. He was one of the scouts carrying a submachine gun. As he went over the log, he slipped. And because you normally try to grab something, he dropped his gun to grab the log, and the thing fell, and as he's bent over, it went boom! So it went in the cheek and out the cheek, thankfully not hitting anything else. It went in and out. Unfortunately, in that type of medical environment, although it's in and out, you'd think, oh, terrific, 2 Band-Aids. It doesn't work that way because usually there's damage inside to the muscle, etc. So they've got to open everything, make sure there's nothing remaining, dirt, leaves or anything, and then they pack it, making sure there's no infection, and later they suture everything back. Then give his muscle a long time to get fixed. We thought that was quite humorous. Just that storyline.
Oh, well, it's good he could have a laugh about it.
That's right.
Well.
Yes. One of his.
So what were you photographing there? You were photographing the arrival of Paul Hasluck and his tour, or?
Yes, but one of the main things was also photographs for the unit, and so someone had been told that you need photographs of any visiting dignitaries. It's valuable for us in the future, whatever. Unfortunately, I didn't realise at my young age that that's the type of photography I was also doing. So people such as General Westmoreland visiting, Paul Hasluck, there's a couple of other famous Australian generals that visited through. So as I trotted along with the commanding officer and the generals and made sure I photographed them in their right positions and things, and then the photos, once developed, I gave to the unit, and what the unit did with them, I'm not too sure, but I have seen them reoccur in books and things. So I know that they were used with the unit in mind, and things to illustrate that.
Just remembered what you said about the man that you spoke to on the phone about the parking fine. He turned out to have been injured, and he remembers having a photographer climbing all over him.
Yes, stepping over people. Yeah,
did you upset people at all, do you think, doing that?
I always felt conscious. Because there I am with the camera, and these people are in dire straits, etc. And I always thought, well, how are they going to perceive this? But the people usually are so distracted by their own condition that they don't know. Plus, a lot of the people we got, most of the people we got, had already had first aid, being at least a morphine injection. And usually after the shot of morphine, I don't know what it was, amount, 25 grams or whatever, but they were in an amendable mood by the time we got them. I remember one, which would be interesting to illustrate, was, and we'd never seen this because we were never permitted to get any close to the Special Air Service. They had their own little place at New Idiot that they stayed, and they kept to themselves. I think you've seen something in there, Odd Angry Shot, that film with Kennedy, Graham Kennedy in it. Okay, they were supposed to be SAS soldiers, and from that, so we kept away from them. You never saw them. You don't even see them nowadays. It's this mystique about them. Now what happens is we got one, and we didn't know, but as he came off the chopper, we knew he'd been injured in the arm, and when they released him, even the chopper pilots didn't want to touch him. He came off the chopper, no bandage on, half his arm missing. I mean, not half his arm, all the muscle below here was just missing, and you could see part of the bone. And he's still carrying his armaments, still carrying his grenades, and he was one of the few people in camouflage. Australian ships were not issued with camouflage. These guys were. And his face was green and brown and black. He looked the mean bit. Arnold Schwarzenegger, young Arnold Schwarzenegger, you don't touch him. And the glazed look on his face, we knew he'd been drugged. And, one of their things is, you're not going to get my gun. And one of the things, we had to take the arms off them and the grenades, and we had a special storage area at the side of the chopper pad, because we couldn't have these things go off inside the hospital. So we were preparing, all ready, and everyone took one look at the guy's eyes, and they were not going to touch him, and he was walking. We were trying to lead him up to the hospital, and he was walking. He wouldn't lie down, and he's walking, and then we thought, oh, shit, we've got to get this stuff off him. And one of our nurses, I think it was our New Zealand nurse, because she's always in white, the white veil, and she goes, what are these men doing? So she walks right up to him, faces him in the eye, and you could see his eyes go like that, thinking, what? As if, what am I confronted with? And he was so stunned, she just picked the stuff off him. We thought, no, we wouldn't have done it at all. We were so scared of him. But she got it, and she came in, sit down here, etc. And then the surgeons took one look at him and said, more jabs, out. He went. Then they could operate on him. But he looked mean. Young guy.
What an amazing story.
That was. It was. It sort of really burned into my mind.
But it's I guess what's amazing is the man could die, but he's completely conditioned to function as.
Yes, and that's what got us. And it's the expression. One of the things I learnt, I suppose, as a sheriff, seeing people, anyone from die-hard criminals to your average parking offence person who won't pay that, was you can tell in their eyes. You can tell where you stand with a person, and you'd look and you go, uh-oh, I'm not going to push this situation further. You look at some people's eyes and say, I can push this person around real easy. Well, you don't, because it can backfire. But let's say you can do your job without backup. And some people who say, I'm not going to do anything without backup to this particular person. There's things that you notice and your body read. I suppose you get that as a survival technique. And we were doing that to this guy. And we thought, no way are we going to go near this guy. We know what he's going to react. We know what he's going to do to us if we try to take these things off him.
What would he have done, do you think?
He would have lashed out. I mean, he could have fired. He could have just gone, not with his other arm, but these guys are trying to use the other arm. He could have just flipped, just straight on it, bang. A rifle, a very short rifle, cut-down rifle, which we weren't allowed to do. But they could do all sorts of things. So it's a matter of zip, bang, bang. These guys were so good. I was privileged to read a report, which is supposedly secret, but because the officer couldn't sleep and I wasn't allowed to sleep, I helped him with him. He was a high-ranking person who eventually became a general, and he was reading a report. And at that stage, as a private, I couldn't read the abbreviations. I didn't know what he was reading. It just looked like gobbledygook. And he's reading things through, and he was saying, look at this. Here's a SAS report. Look, ambush successful, 7 enemies sighted, 7 enemy killed, 7 rounds expended. What else do you have to say? That's, I thought, yeah, all right, I don't want anything to do with the SAS. But that's good, that's very good. Normally they'd fire a few more rounds. But these guys were doing things that I don't even want to delve into. But, yeah, they were good. They were trained. We appreciated what they could do to the limits of their physical capacity. But their training was really, really good. We all respected them. And if they came in wounded, I tell you what, we'd go out of our way to do things for them because we respected them.
So did they come in wounded very often?
No, nope, no. This is the only guy we knew of that come in because he came straight out of the field, rescued straight off wherever they were. They had certain conditions that they performed quite often, or sometimes they would actually abort an operation because they heard a shot. They thought, they may have been compromised in their landing or something. So they were very careful, and we knew that they were doing things that no ordinary soldier could do. They used to take drugs so that they wouldn't cough or sneeze and little things like that. But yeah, I'll stay off that subject.
Is there anything else that you could say about your encounters with the SAS?
No, because in Vietnam it was too infrequent. That was the main one, and the little report that I had from the particular officer who remembered me much later in my military service. And the reason he remembered me was that, again, you're tired and you're doing all sorts of things. And our coffee and our salt, coffee and sugars were placed in unlabelled tins that we used to get from the mess. You know, just empty cans with the pop-top lids. And they were unlabelled, so we used to get Texture or something, just write on them, sugar, coffee. Anyway, these things had been turned around, and it was late, and I was tired, and he couldn't sleep, so he asked me for a cup of tea. Sure, Ziggy will make a cup of tea because there's no one else awake. So I made him a cup of tea, gave it to him, took one slurp, and spat it everywhere. And I thought, a full kernel, I'm going to be court-martialed for this. What I didn't realise, I put salt instead of sugar into his tea. So as soon as he took it, you know, because he gulped one down, he almost vomited. And I was so petrified. He must have looked at the fear in my eyes because he burst out laughing. And he had a sore back. That's why he was in hospital. He said, oh, no, the pain, the pain. And from then on, we got on famously. And one other time, I was a sergeant at the Yeronga Military Hospital in Brisbane, on duty there. And we had Keith Payne, the Victoria Cross winner, in hospital for a checkup. And the General wanted to come and see him and pay his respects. So naturally, all the staff lined up there, and it's like the poor General had to do a gauntlet run through all these people, all the staff, you know, standing to attention. And he comes past and he's looking at everyone and just nodding his head. He stops in front of me. I didn't know who the General was until I saw his eyes. And he was the Colonel that had been my patient. And he stopped, looked at me, and the first thing I did was salute naturally. And he saluted and he stuck his hand out. And we shook hands and he said, how the hell are you, Ziggy? I thought, what? Oh, pretty good, sir, pretty good, sir. He says, good. Are you looking after my man? Yes, sir. Good, keep it up. And he walked on. Should have seen the look of all the officers, etc. Looking at me as only a sergeant. How does a general know you by your first name? That sort of attitude. They didn't know the story that led up to it. Oh, I knew him in the bullet zone. I nearly killed him with salted drink. But he remembered me. And by the time he got back to Australia, and by the time I got promoted, he got promoted to Brigadier General. And he came in to see Keith Payne. So, there we were.
What was his name?
The General, Brigadier White. I didn't know his first name. We were never on a first name basis. Well, I wasn't. I called him Sir all the time. Yeah. So he'd be well retired by now because he was much older than I was. He'd be well into his 80s by now, I'm pretty sure.
You mentioned before that you went up to Nui Dash. What was that for?
To record our forward unit. We had an outpost. It was a solid building out there, and I think it was an 8-bed ward, which means, you know, the people who didn't have to evacuate for treatment at Vung Tau by surgeons, etc., could spend an overnight. Things such as flu, you know, that would knock people, and you don't want them spreading it in, you know, to their own mates in the tent or whatever. So you had to isolate them for a couple of days. Maybe some serious strains or something that needed medical attention for a regular time. We didn't trust the troops to take their own tablets that you gave to them. That's one reason why people get hospitalised, because the doctors can't trust you to make sure you take a medication at the early stages. Because if you don't take it on a regular basis, their treatment doesn't work. You know, gives the bacteria or the viruses or whatever it is a chance to rebuild and hit you harder. So that's what we had out there, and it was a staging post for any flights of evacuations. Some of the evacuations come straight there to be reassessed quickly and then ongoing to our hospital. So I had to photograph that, take a few records of it. Slept in the hospital bed for once without being sick, which was good. But the interesting thing there was that they were surrounded by the actual fighting troops, and they had a couple of very huge American cannons there somewhere, or some massive Australian ones. Knew nothing about artillery. But what they used to do was, at certain times, they used to fire. They used to fire on targets that they'd have on maps. It was basically just to deny the enemy coming back to certain positions. So they used to, you know, fire on that position and recalculate the gun, and at another time fire at another position. And you're trying to sleep during all this? I didn't realise that all the guys who lived there got used to it. And then once I saw a gunner sleeping beside the gun when it went off, didn't even stir. I thought, this is fantastic, because as you were going to the meal, when the guns went off, and that could be something like 50, poof, the air pressure, poof, hit your clothing. And you think, ooh, gee, that's powerful. And the funny thing is the toilets. They were pit toilets, and there used to be a row of them. So when you go to the toilet, you're sitting there with your mates having a chat. Okay, so there's there, and you're sitting there. I was there by myself one time, sitting there, and the gun went off. And the air pressure, when all the lids went, poppity pop 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 pop. Whoa! So I thought, gee, that's odd. So it's mighty things those things can do.
So what actually was the purpose of documenting this little clearing station there?
Purely for our records. Yeah. Because although the guys there would be taking snapshots of each other and things like that, even I've got a snapshot of me standing outside because, people say, at home, when you're sending us all these photos, but where are you? Where are you all the time? So every now and then I got someone to take a photo of me in front of something that I could relate to. And it was basically just to record what we had. See, some people were thinking ahead to the future or to history or something. As a young guy, at 20 years of age, I wasn't. I wasn't really comprehending what I was doing. Just taking photos, and I was very happy to do that because it got me around, it got me to see things. Yes, I realise the great value of these things now.
Did you get very much acknowledgement for your work, the quality of your work?
No. Just a thank you for the shots. No, it's just that now when I actually blow up the photos and that you think, at 20 years of age, not knowing much, I was taking reasonable photos. That's what I consider back now for that.
And how many cameras did you have?
Only one. It was a Pentax, forget the model, one of the original SLRs, and again, no exposure metering, etc. The model the Army had given me was a full manual one. The one I bought over there I tried to match it as close as I could, but it had the ability to stick an exposure meter on top and just it linked in with the speed dial or something on it. So that was of advantage when running around the bush. So I tended to use my camera out in the bush because of the different exposures, but in the operating theatre I definitely used the Army one all the time because it was standard lighting and I had no trouble there at all.
When you say out in the bush, whereabouts out in the bush were you going?
Well, it depends. Out into the villages, or a number of times we had to fly out to the forward posts because people would get either sick, malaria. We were always so careful with malaria. We'd get people with malaria, and the last thing once they started getting a fever, you couldn't keep them out there. They're useless. All the guys want to do is either usually die. They're feeling so ill with it, so we had to transport them back where they could be looked after and not harm themselves with it. So you tended to fly out, fly in, and just to document them being put on the chopper and things like that. So I never had to go to an actual casualties battles we picked up because we were too busy ready at the hospital for that to come in. So it was only the routine cases we had to pick up in the field. One time I got a big fright because we're coming in, the sun was setting, we'd come in and do a sweeping turn, and as the choppers bend across, I'm looking straight down there, there's rice paddies. I think, I've got my seatbelt on, because, you're leaning down, helicopter's on its side, and you're looking straight down. But the inertia of the turn keeps you inside without you falling out. Oh, dear me. And all of a sudden, in the rice paddy, I see these red flashes going off everywhere. Oh, we're being shot at. And I look at the crewman sitting by the machine gun, and I'm looking at him and he's not firing. Oh, what a brave yank, chewing his chewing gum. Oh, and I'm looking down and I go, oh no, and I'm almost pooing my pants. Then I realised what was happening as we got a bit lower. The setting sun, the Vietnamese had tinsel on the rice stalks to scare the birds, and the red rays of the sun was reflecting these all over the place. And I thought there was 100 guys down there shooting at me. But then on another flight, we were coming back at night. We were coming back and looking at it, I thought, oh my God, you could see the explosions. You could see the explosions going off on the ground. You could see trees being lifted up and dropping. And you think, oh my God, they wouldn't be firing unless they thought there was someone down there. And this weird feeling comes over you knowing that there's people right there, right below you, and you're thinking, well, it's only our side that's got artillery, so we're killing somebody down there. And all of a sudden that's a shock. And then all of a sudden another shock. I was wearing the headpiece with the microphones in it, and I could hear swearing and cursing in American going on. I thought, oh, what's that going on? we were flying for an artillery barrage. We flew into the wrong area. So that someone caught us on radar, and is telling off the pilot, what the hell are you doing there? Can't stop the barrage, get out of there. So we just prayed, for about, I think it was about 2 minutes till we zoomed out of that area without getting hit. Because the Americans have got a photograph of a plane flying and it's just been hit and the tail was blowing off. Somebody just took a snapshot and just caught that in the photograph, and that could have been us for his artillery thing. So that was a big shock. I think it took me a couple of days to get over that one because it was so close. First of all, I'm thinking those people are getting killed down there. And all of a sudden, we were the target. Unintentionally friendly fire. Yes, that was a bit frightening. One of our medics got actually wounded. He was on the flight, looking out the window, just sitting there, looking out. All of a sudden, a bullet just grazed his forehead. I said, what have I done? Blood pouring down his face. And again, didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, bang. Because people just sit there and take shots at the Americans. Happens.
Can we talk a little bit about your involvement with the local people?
Mm-hmm.
You went out to the villages. What were those excursions that you were on?
Well, we had a regular schedule when we were hoping nothing was going on. What happened was that the tendency of any activity or sweeps or any searches that they were doing, that's where we expected the wounded or action to occur. So therefore we were always on standby. This was predicted. As diggers, we didn't know anything about it. All we knew was that you're there and you're not called out to do anything. Every now and then you'd be called upon, it was scheduled that, Ziggy, you've got to be on standby. You're going with the, I forget what we called them. We never called it hearts and minds, but that's what the civilian medical teams did. We called it something else, aid to the community. And we'd chosen a number of villages that we used to go into, and we'd go in with an interpreter, a couple of the doctors, and a whole pile of medicines. We'd go in there, document the population. Anyone who could be treated instantly, they would, either with just antibiotic shots and things, which again, as I say, worked miracles to these people. They thought we were great. Did that, and then my job was to, anything that was unusual, to take a photograph of it, or I took photographs of the kids, and we went in some of these villages. There were orphanages, and so we went there, took shots of the classes and kids playing and things. And but it was mainly the medical work to do there. One particular place we went to, and in the book, the anaesthetist has in his book that we went there, and there wasn't too much to do, and there wasn't many photographs. There was no photographs for Ziggy to take. And we thought, this is very strangely quiet. Usually, people come out of the woodwork to see us. We looked at it, and it was somehow intimated we should get on the Land Rover and go back. And you looked at it and you thought, no patients, no nothing. And you thought, you get this funny feeling, we're maybe not supposed to be here today. And what I've woken up since then could have been that because we were doing medical things in the village, maybe there was something going on in the village that we could have got into trouble about. We only had defensive weapons, etc. And it was encouraged that you shouldn't be here, please go back. And we did. And there's no mention in the book of any premonition or anything, but it's only later on that I woke up that, this is the most unusual situation we faced. Maybe they let us go because of the work we were doing there. They didn't want to interfere with us.
So was that the headman that told you to go?
I think it was the local priest. They weren't allowed to say it openly, but it was sort of, look, there's no patients for you today. We thought, that's odd, very odd. Because, we were the saviours. I mean, we had the medicines and all that sort of stuff. And, so we had no patients that particular day. And I think we all realised we better take the suggestion that we move on and got out of there.
Do you think there were Viet Cong in the village?
Could have been something there, yes. Because you could feel the unease amongst the people, right? So something was going on. So I was happy to get out. Not realising until later really what we had faced. And so that's something that's always sat uncomfortably with me. because we never knew really what went on. It was just so unusual. And I thought, that's all right, thank God for that.
What about the nightlife in Vung Tau? Did you partake of that at all?
Very rarely, because you had to be careful. So first of all, curfew was at 10 o'clock. Secondly, you had to be careful that you didn't drink too much. And almost every bar you went to, there's always girls that you could take upstairs, you see. So me, I was very, very careful of all that stuff. And, typical there, I don't know, it still happens now. I mean, you sit down at a bay, you're going with mates and the girls sidle up and, you buy me tea, and you think, yeah, okay, I'll buy a drink or something, just so you'll sit there, etc. But then they try to say, well, there's more things we can do for you, sort of thing. And that, well, that's where their money comes from, and the drink. So you have to be very careful that you didn't drink too much, because you'd miss your curfew, and then you're in the poo. You get picked up by you can get picked up by the Vietnamese police, but it's mostly MPs that you'd be picked up by, and you could get charged for outstaying there. There's an interesting factor. On guard duty one night, knowing all these things, knowing curfew, and all of a sudden, about midnight, and the ambulance comes roaring in, and you get a message, ambulance coming in. Which one, air? No. On the road, coming in, you see the light flashing. I think one of our ambulances had a light. It's flashing, you go, oh my God, midnight, I'm the only guy there. What do I do? Because everyone's asleep by this stage, This ambulance comes roaring in, comes this big squeal and parks, and I'm like, I'm by myself. What am I going to do here? I'm expecting all these casualties in this ambulance because the driver looks serious, so bugger. I open the door, open the two doors, they swing open. Who have we got in there? Coming home after curfew? The officers with some of the nurses, all tanked to the gills, and they fall out of the thing and you go, okay, sir, okay, ma'am, off you go, up there, thank God it's not a casualty, keep all this quiet.
How did they manage to hitch a lift in the ambulance?
Oh, they had it pre-arranged. The ambulances could travel after curfew. Yeah, so they were somewhere, maybe at the American base. You had to get past curfew to get from the American base back to us. You had to actually drive through town. So, yeah, so they had their arrangements by ambulance. So I thought later on that was quite funny, but it frightened me, thinking there was all these casualties coming in. So that was something odd. Reminds me of MASH for some reason. Little things like that. We had people, the humour of it, people coming up, we didn't have anyone go psycho as such, dressing up as a woman, but we had two gentlemen try to change their names to each other, and the army tried to dissuade them through that, and we didn't know what was going on, but we won't ask any questions about that. We had one gentleman have a whole series of Dad and Dave audio tapes that he used to play. In MASH you hear that, all sorts of weird things being broadcast from the loudspeakers. We had that. And we had stories of Dad and Dave and Mum and, and Snake Gully and all this sort of stuff. Somebody brought it, and we thought it was weird. It was lovely. It was real Australiana being broadcast, and some of us who were, well, everyone in my vintage had heard, the Dad and Dave. We grew up with that on the radio because we didn't have TV. So that was one of the hit shows of that era. So that was something that was broadcast, and people would try to get away with all sorts of things just to keep the humour up and that, and the officers used to, oh, I didn't see that, and they'd go off. We had something which is well documented. The Australians ambushed a party of, they'd been watching it for a while. They ambushed what later on turned out a family group, killed the adults, but they heard crying off in the distance, so they went back to have a look, and there was a young child sitting in the mud in the torrential rain, weighed down with machine gun bullets over him. I said, well, okay, it's a child, we don't kill children. So they took the bullets off him, etc., brought him back to us. So we don't know what to do with him. Here, you take him. And the nurses adopted him, little kid. And the Red Cross and the physio woman, because he was jaundiced. He had a problem with his eye, and one leg was twisted. And that's what kept him alive, because he was too late to get into the ambush zone. And so I think we killed his family. But he's a young gentleman called Mott, M-O-T. and he's in some of my photos, and he's in some official stories, because I remember traipsing around behind one of their visiting generals, and we were told, keep Mott out of sight. So we were coming around, and I'm always right up to the head people, snap, 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 your photo, sir. And what happened was the general spied this child shoot across our path with, everyone said, oh my God. And the general turned to the commanding officer and he says, if that's who I think it is, you placed him into an orphanage 3 months ago, didn't you? He just kept going. This young fellow was not only recuperated, he had physio on his leg, his colour changed, and he had his own Land Rover to take him to school. And he basically was adopted as a mascot. And all the guys used to look after him, and the nurses used to look after him. He used to live on base. Whatever happened to him later, I don't know. But we certainly recuperated him, and he knew all the swear words too, by the time the guys finished with him. But yeah, that was a very unusual thing, but something that you'd expect MASH to do, things like that, yeah. And
where were you doing guard duty? Was that on the main gate, or was that
sometimes
at the hospital?
I've done a couple of duties on the main gate. Yeah, we had to put people on there. One of the impressions I got, because we got, remember I mentioned we had the F1 submachine gun and 9mm rounds, and we thought they were pretty good up to a particular stage until we got some wounded in. Some, I think they were Viet Cong, yeah, but we'd shot at them, and they came in, and somebody said, I can't imagine it. I emptied my gun at him, look, he's still alive. I said, what? And when we took the clothes off the particular chap, he had another injury. When we took it off, he had bruises on his back. That was during the rain. The guys knocked him over and that, but what it was, the bullets never penetrated, and he had just bruises from the bullets on his back. And after I saw that, I thought, I don't trust this gun. It's only going to bruise somebody. But that, I don't know what distance they fired at, whatever. And after that, you thought, oh, gee. But when you were on guard duty, you had the standard rifle, and you felt so powerful with that, because you knew what that could do. And you could, oh, they can wheel a tank at me, I'll shoot the tank, which you couldn't. But you felt so good having a real powerful rifle. And it did give you a sense of power, the big rifles. Yeah, but that's on that duty. Quite often the main duty was within perimeter, within your camp. You had to do that. There were certain things you had to maintain, certain heating appliances you had to keep running, a few things like that.
The hospital was right on the beach, yeah?
Very close. We were in the sand dunes, but it was enough distance back that anyone had to get through another unit to get to us. And there was a whole series of barbed wire entanglements and things like that to get to us. But we were in a very safe position, so the only warnings we had was where, for some reason, some bodies used to get washed up. And there should be a big clamp down close until they made sure the area was safe. The discomforting thing was, and those were the days that you used oil as a suntanning lotion, knowing nothing about UV rays or anything. So you'd go down the beach for a bit of a suntan, oil yourself over, you'd lie on the beach on a towel, and the Yanks would fly over thinking, look at those Aussies. So they lower their chopper. And what happens when the chopper gets close to the sand? All the sand blows all over the oil. And you get up and you try to go back to camp like a sandman. We didn't like that at all. But the Yanks thought it was very funny.
Did you ever question your reason for being there, or Australia's reason for being there?
Not at the time, never, no. And I had a very strong belief in that. So I had no problems with that at all. It's just that when we came back to Australia and continued my military service here, very quickly learnt that you'd never go anywhere with in your uniform if you can at all avoid it. Never. And the dead giveaway was when we were in Townsville. Our unit moved to Townsville later, and you had to wear, you could wear shorts, the uniform, and they had to use up what's called puttees. So you didn't wear gaiters, you wore puttees, which were those bandages that wrapped around you up to about there, like long socks, over your boots. And we thought, how old British is this? Just that they had the store, they had to get rid of them. So they nominated that as an official uniform. And we thought, oh, this is how, but we had to follow army instructions to wear it. The only problem was when you went to town, people always knew you were military because you had this funny white leg and you had this white stripe down the side of your face from the slouch hat. So you couldn't even get away then. Not wearing a uniform, but The suntan always gave you away. People would know. Plus, you tend to talk funny. Even to this day, people at work say, "Oh, Ziggy, stop that." I'm talking to people and they say, "Yeah, Roger that," and that, stop it. That's the only thing I can't get rid of. It's the same thing that if I'm talking to police or I'm hearing in a conversation somewhere, yeah, easy cop. Just from the way people talk. Once you're in a couple of years, there's a speech pattern that you get into, and you use that, and military can get into that badly, and you can spot them a mile away.
It's a kind of reporting style.
Yeah, very, very short to the point, and
Were you getting any news from home? Were you writing letters?
Yes, many letters, as many letters as you could. We had no problem with mail. There used to be about a 2-week turnaround. Like you sent off a letter to get an answer back. That was quite regular. So you tried to send as many photos as you could. All of that was quite good. You had no problems with that at all.
Can you tell us about that? Your tour was what? You were there from 60... Can you give us a sort
67, 68. So we arrived in country at the beginning of April, 67. And I left there in February, could have been February the 28th of 68. And when I left, because I've just checked with my diary, I was one of the later people to go. I didn't mind it because I was a regular soldier, but I've noted my diary saying, oh, things are getting a little bit depressing, all my mates are gone, things like that. All these new people are rolling in that you don't know, and you know that you're not going to establish friendships because you're going to go in relation to it. And although I had applied to stay on, because I got quite used to it. I got quite used to it after that. And then later, the reason I wanted to get all the regs home was that they put us into a training role after that. They sent us to units that we could actually train others because we've had the experience out there. The national servicemen with the experience all left. Immediately they got home, they're out. So that was the element. So well, when we were prepared, we were flown by military aircraft to Saigon, and then we had to hang around waiting for the Qantas flight of a 707, sheer luxury. They actually had air hostesses, which is most unusual, because prior to that one only put stewards aboard the aircraft. Too many men coming back from a war zone. So anyway, the drinks were free. So again, I can't drink much, so that was all right. And I was more interested in the aircraft and things like that. But before we left, we'd had a few drinks, and we're sitting up in one of the lounges up top, and it's the first time someone tried to teach me to play cards. Never played cards. Took up smoking, but could never get the sense or the interest in cards. So we're sitting at the airport, ready to go, and all of a sudden the sky lights up, and all these flares going off and everything. After a few drinks, we said, hey, it's a going away party. They're sending us home. Look at them. They're celebrating that we're going home. Isn't that great? And all of a sudden, we were shuffled aboard the aircraft really quickly, and we took off. And as during the air, we found out somebody realised, oh, fellas, you might not be interested, or you might be interested. This is the captain speaking. But we've just had a message that what we believe is a Tet offensive has just started in Saigon. You are leaving. And everyone said, hey, cheers. So we flew out when all the activity was starting. And it was the closest they actually got into Saigon. We left just as it all started.
But not realising just how serious things actually
Correct.
were.
Yeah. Because we'd been through one. It didn't come anywhere near us and didn't affect us. But this one, it actually hit Saigon. And on the night that we flew out. So we wouldn't have got back to Australia.
Boy. Those last weeks there, you mentioned that, you know, things were winding down for you. It's almost like full circle. You talked about when you got there and the guys who were on their way were sort of slowing down and counting off the days, I guess. Was that something that you did? And we've heard some people talk about just marking on the calendar, you know, one more day to go.
Although we had calendars, yes, there was a countdown calendar in various guises. Yeah, it was counting down. But with me, I didn't know the final day until I think it was only a couple of weeks beforehand. All I was told was, look, you're a reg, you know, we're going to schedule you for when it suits us. So, no, that's all right. You know, because I had formally volunteered to stay on. And I thought, well, why send me back? I'm quite comfortable here, thank you. Not realising what they wanted with me in the future. So, took it on and left.
So at the end of your time in country, looking back, had it just been an adventure, or was it more? Well,
I looked at it as a job because I had still another 4 years to go. So I looked at it as a career move, you might say. A very Well, I was so fortunate, I believe, because look, I just joined the army, did the training, bang, I'm over there, and bang, I'm coming back as a veteran. I thought, this is all right. I wonder how that will stand me in good stead for my future military service, which it did. It was favourable as a result of it. And no, I don't regret it. The effect of people dying unnecessarily and us really losing the war, that's the thing that sort of sticks in your mind. And the most reaction is the homecoming. There was no homecoming for a starter. It was the effect of what Australians thought of you. It's almost like that ad that they have on TV at the moment, you're a banker, and everyone quietens down at the barbecue. Oh yeah, but I'm with St. George. Oh, fantastic, It was that sort of thing. As soon as anywhere in a crowd, if you were in a new social group or anything, you were in Vietnam, place goes quiet and think, what am I going to get hit with here? Some of the young bucks would come up, what was it like, a few questions, and other people just don't want to talk to him. And that became so clear and so apparent. And a person who grew up with this attitude that, if you served your country and you did the right thing and I suppose didn't carry out massacres and things like that, hey, your country would welcome you and reward you for what you did, for what you put out. Didn't happen that way. Didn't happen that way at all.
Yeah, it sounds like a feeling of incredible displacement. I mean, you when you go away, it's the adventure, but you're coming back, so there's safety in that. But when you come back, it's this place where you're supposed to belong, and
as if it never happened. That was a thing, and no, it's a strange feeling. This is why now I think some of us are saying it did happen. We've got to document it. We've got to do things about it. So maybe somebody can learn from it. Maybe people like yourselves who are documenting these things now, whether somebody could put that into some sort of context that future people who are going to go and do these things, that there is some facility for them to be, I know the big thing nowadays is what's called counselling, etc. And surprisingly, if you're able to talk something like this through, somebody sits you down beforehand and says, these are the sort of things that you're going to encounter. This is what's going to happen. This is afterwards. This is what you're going to feel. You're mentally prepared and you're ready for all these little nuances of this going to happen, that's going to happen. You're mentally prepared. If the person who arrives in country, I suppose not with the attitude I had of terrible grief and all this awful stuff that's going to happen, so I was always elated that the awful stuff never happened to me and that survived. So hopefully things do improve for people.
Mm-hmm. What sort of assistance was there when you came back? I mean, to help in that adjustment, was there?
None. Went straight back home. Got a payment. Stayed at home because I had something like 5 or 6 weeks annual leave due to me. It was a long period, special leave, etc. After that, and just from there, got a telegram or a letter. Look, okay, your leave's finishing. Report to such and such an area. You've just been assigned to. You've just been assigned to 2 field ambulance was the unit we replaced. So okay. So still in the medical area and back to Puckapunyal. Oh my God. And we're just back into it, but here in Australia, so totally different field.
Was there ever any possibility of doing another tour in Vietnam?
Although I had volunteered and I would have gladly gone back, what they had scheduled was that they were losing so many national service people with experience, they needed as many regular soldiers who were signed up for 6 years to continue with it. And so they shifted our unit from Puckapunyal to Townsville to fill up a totally new area they call Laverick Barracks, near the Cook University up there. So we were one of the first units to march in there. I was there only about less than 9 months, getting used to the place, getting used to the heat, and then I transferred out of there, and I realised why. Transferred down to Brisbane, straight into a training facility, because the Yeronga Hospital in Brisbane was the teaching area for one of the teaching areas for medics going to Vietnam, or who'd been scheduled to go to Vietnam. So eventually, in Brisbane itself, I did was posted about 3 times. I was there for 3 years, posted 3 times in that period. One was 8th Battalion, because I moved 3 times, but so they're the 2 main units. But it was at Yeronga Military Hospital that I got promoted to sergeant. That's where I was doing all the teaching. No, that was good. That was good. Because you teach people this is the way it's done, and then they expect you to say, well, that's the way it's taught, and what really happens in the real world. So you've got to prepare. This is where I thought this element of preparing them for what union was going over there would have been great assistance to them.
So what were you training them in mainly?
Medical stuff, ward procedures, because that's what they were scheduled for. Well, no matter what kind of a medic you are, you have to know ward procedures. And these were the guys who were scheduled to do medical assistant work, not medical orderly. So not administrative, but the hands-on medical stuff. We had to teach them to do injections and things like that. And here's the concept that you get, which struck home to me again. You've probably seen this from the show. I don't know if you ever saw a show called Gomer Pyle, right? Where supposedly he's a very dumb character, but he's one of these. He always gets out of trouble and all that because he's got this whimsical homespun philosophy, right? And he's a good guy. The military have a thing that you hear a lot of things bad, but here's the thing: if a person pulls their weight, people will look after them. In this particular unit, we had one guy in this training group. We had one guy. And I thought, how did those psych guys let him through? He's just not bright enough. Because we helped him with his homework and all that, and he used to drink like a fish. And here's an example: we'd stand him up in class because he'd fall asleep, and he'd snore standing up. He's one of these guys, and he wasn't under any duress, you know. So he'd do that. And when he was doing practicing hitting the orange with giving an injection, what did he do? He'd inject his own fingers, little things like that. So he was the butt of everyone. But because he helped, because he was genuine, guys would go out of their way to help him, you know. And they'd rescue him from town at night when he's had too much to drink, all these sort of little things. So people looked after each other. So that was good.
You're talking about that difficulty of coming back and sort of readjusting and sort of people not being able to understand what you've been through. Was there anyone other than friends perhaps in the army that you could talk to your experiences about?
I think the worst thing was that you couldn't. I mean, you talk to people like we're talking now. They'd ask you questions because they were interested. It was an unusual thing, but you could see the look in their eyes that they just couldn't understand what you were saying. It's like you say with military people who've been there. You say, well, look, there's certain things you don't have to say because you all know it. So it's an instant bond. You know it, and so there's no need to talk about it. But no, there was no one. Unless they were over there at about the same time as you, because each year had a different effect, I believe. People from Monasterville Hospital had a different experience than what we did, and the people prior to us would have had a very vastly different experience to us. So it changed as it got along. Plus with the effect of what was happening in Australia, changed also, and influenced people from that. Yeah, but no, there was nothing where you could go and talk to somebody who understood about these things. And what you did was because, regular army soldier, you're a sergeant by that stage, and no, I'm not affected by anything. No, mate, I'm pretty good, pretty tough.
So you were promoted not long after coming back, were you? Is that when you went to Brisbane?
Yes, promoted very quickly through Lance Corporal, then to sergeant at the hospital where I was an assistant instructor doing it there, and so that was good. No, it was just because by that stage we were getting into 1972, so my 6 years were coming up, and was married in 72 and decided not to continue with it because all of a sudden Vietnam was finishing, and for some reason I felt, well, if Vietnam's gone, why would you want to stay in the military? And I decided to go at that stage, not to renew my contract. I don't regret it because I went then into Army Reserves and did the officer training.
So you're saying because of the failure in Vietnam that sort of association meant the military wasn't for you, or what was the connection?
No, it's because what happened was, in the Vietnam days, the military money was pouring into the military. You had things to do, always, because the preparation was that if you're a soldier, that's all the training was geared to Vietnam. As soon as Vietnam closed, because that was the time that I joined the Army Reserve, money was being cut, training was being cut. You were getting people joining the Army Reserve, people who would have been of good value, but the interest factor, the training wasn't there. So all these advertisements are flying around in choppers and doing this and that. False advertising. It wasn't there. And you realise you're wasting your time. Although I was offered a position to go back. So at that stage I changed from medical corps to ordnance, which is supplies. I was a supply officer. My whole attitude had changed. And I said, no, look, if you can't do something which is real, I'd experienced, it wasn't a good life, but it was the way the military functioned. I'd experienced that, and in peacetime, it's not there. This is why it would be quite different now with all the effects that the Australian Army's doing. And I know my sister was very interested because that's when, I think Timor had just started, while she was in the forces. Yeah, so, well, to her everything was new, so she continued with it for quite a while. Well, she died while she was a major, so that's good. Yeah.
So maybe just in sort of wrapping up, what effect ultimately do you think that experience had on you, especially the army experience, but Vietnam itself? How did that? What influence did it have on you, and then sort of the paths that you took after?
I've often thought about this, but I think first of all my religious attitude changed. Look, I'll say I'm a big Christian. I believe in everything that I've been taught in relation to that, but not the ceremonial trappings, especially of Catholicism, right? No, that's out the door. Big believer in everything I was taught, etc. Always willing to help out in those areas and things like that, but no, that's changed. Because what we were confronted with there, and with the concessions we had supposedly religiously wise on eating meat on Fridays and all these sort of things, all that ceremonial stuff, I thought, no, if they're willing to change their mind so quickly on these things, and then they say that's no longer a mortal sin. So you mean everyone who died prior to that is in hell? I thought, no, hang on, fellas, things are a little bit different.
Sorry, religion.
Yes, so I think that was that took a big beating or a shaking or a change in relation to that. Still go to church on occasion and things like that, but no, that was different. I'm a big believer in what do you call it? Salvation Army, because they have this thing called everyman's, which is always at the military side of things. They had an everyman's in Vietnam, where you could go and sort of digress from the military, read books or have a coffee or something like that, just sort of hide your way yourself. And they had a library and things like that, and the guy would come around in his Salvation Army trappings and offer you things, and it was good. They're always there, they're doing things, and they're not pushing anything. I thought, oh gee, this is good. So I'm a sort of big believer in that area. The other thing is, I suppose, this concept of duty, that you have a duty, that you have you make a promise, you complete things. I think that was reinforced to me, because I think when I came back I found so many people did not abide by that concept or that principle anymore. And when I actually left the military, I found that the way the military operated, there was very set procedures. So no matter where you went in Australia, if you were in the army, the only thing you didn't know was the local bylaws, the local culture in that particular area. But you could function in your job because it was Australia-wide, and there was a system to operate that didn't change throughout. And you felt so much at home at it. You felt that you were always confident and capable in what you were doing. But when you move into civilian life, you might go to one company as a one particular role, you change to another company doing that particular role, and things are vastly different. You think, two roles, how come they work so differently? Because they're led by different people with different ideas, different concepts. And the thing that I picked up was the way the military teach, the way they get the information through. Remember, it's to the lowest denominator they have to teach. And what I found in civilian life, in commercial areas now, that no, they dispense with all of that. There are good ways to train and there are ways not to train at all, and a lot of companies don't train. And I'd shifted around after that. I worked at the Austin Hospital for 7 years after leaving. I'd driven taxis for half a year, worked for as a tour guide on camping safaris throughout Australia for 6 months. That was prior to getting married, because we got married late 72, so it was already out, but the marriage had to be set off for a long period because we had to get all the relatives in one spot at one particular time. Those sort of things. I suppose I've never fully settled down in commercial life. Although I've worked in a hospital for 7 years, as the equipment officer eventually, office and all that, and looking after their millions and millions of dollars of equipment, moved from that into sales, went through a number of organisations in the outdoor sales industry, because as soon as I came back I was into bushwalking and going out bush. Then eventually, because all these outdoor industries tended to be very small, because Australia hasn't got the population for that area, they tended to fail, depending on how they were managed, to go out. So eventually the job came up in the last industry I worked. I was made a promise to start. The promise was never kept. So I was looking for something, and this job came up as sheriff, and I thought, what the hell is a sheriff? I know the American sheriffs, what's this? So I went to one of their evenings, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. Well, let's see if I can apply for it. Applied for it, did all the tests, got it. Oh, you beauty. Good pay, take-home car. Unfortunately had badges on it, that sort of thing, and did that for 5 years. And again, that's an area that I could use some of my military skills. And that's an area that they had a few Vietnam veterans in, because we were permitted, being in an official uniform, to wear our ribbons. So you quickly learned who it was, who your mates were. And then we had very experienced guys there. And the sheriff's office did not use them. The sheriffs, people who were in the Army Reserve, at that stage I was an officer in the Army Reserve. Another guy was a major in the Army Reserve. They wouldn't even give us sergeant ranking. And you thought, what in the world? Because we stood up and said things. We stood up and spoke for ourselves. The other guy, the guy who was the Army Reserve major, was our association president. So he spoke up. We don't like people who speak up. So therefore, no promotion, no nothing. That guy is now in charge of Melbourne city parking enforcement, things like that, you see. So he's moved. So I after 5 years, got a package, left. I won't go into what happened, but there are certain things that have been hidden from government. It's not my role to go into it and to reveal them. If they ever have a Royal Commission in it, things can be revealed, but I'm not a whistleblower yet.
So I don't have to pay those fines that I've got building up, do I?
In Victoria, we'll hunt you down. If I'm on the books, I'll find you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully with today, what you've done today, you'll be able to increase that understanding, if even just a little bit. I think you've managed to do that. Anything else you'd like to say, Ziggy, before we call it a day?
Not really. I think I've covered many, many
Hey,
things that you've prompted me for. Yeah.
No, it didn't require too much prompting. It's been fantastic. It's been really good. Thank you, Ziggy.
Thank you.